Chapter 171, New Mission. Watch your back, the poison fangs of spiders may fall upon us at any time. The Grey Elf Rangers who had defected from Lorsi greeted each other like so during their farewells, to remind themselves and their comrades, that the incredibly vindictive Lorsi would never let go of a single grudge, and at any time, she might send her dangerous fangs to obliterate her traitors. Despite the formation of a strong alliance, the Underworld remained as it was. The war between each other is inevitable, but due to a certain reason, the recent power of the Dark Elves who served Lorsi was getting weaker. Due to trading under an underground contract, heir, the demon messenger in the Underworld had disappeared abruptly, and thus, the Underworld cities of his human servants had gradually surrendered themselves to the Sulphur Mountain City. As more and more Underworld cities sought refuge or alliances, Annie's autarky status was gaining a firm foothold in the Underworld. The three new autarchs, Einmeseus the Dragon Queen, Annie the Fire Phoenix, and Center Anya the Underworld Beastman Sovereign had an intimate relationship, and their forces had always been banding together, and thus, the influence of Dark Elves had been significantly curbed. This was just like in any market trade. If a few mega companies held above 70% of the market shares, they would possess the pricing power and would be capable of monopolizing the market, and the small businesses would easily go bankrupt. As the situation had progressed to this state, when all sorts of treaties for lowering tax on sales had been signed, many business entities would disregard the city of Dark Elves and play their own games, which it would evidently lead to a fatal hit on the Dark Elves' economics. In this situation, the Dark Elves would have made their move. "You are not selling me anything? I will rob the headquarters. You dare to hinder the market trading? Believe it or not, I will kill your whole family." We are the Dark Elves. Not just charcoal heads with long ears. Nobody ever mocked the Dark Elves' threat. Being one of the few fanatic races that would embrace burglary and trickery as their virtues, the Dark Elves had always been easily offended. At times, they might not speak out, but one must still be aware of their deadly grudges and ambushes. The Underworld Oath of Alliance was established for the sake of the world peace. Anyone who declares war will be the common enemy of all the ally members, with no exception even for the Underworld Autarchs. In fact, the Underworld Autarch should abide by the peace accord even more strictly, or she would have to endure the hostility from the other Autarchs. If anyone would have shouted this sentence 1 year ago, everyone would take him as an imbecile. However, when it was spoken by Annie, who had won the support from almost 70% of the forces, no one dared to take the peace accord as a joke anymore. Besides, it was self-evident that which Underworld Autarch that sentence was directed at. Meanwhile, some Grey Dwarfs who were serving the Dark Elves due to military pressure, and the Underworld Dwarf City, had realized that the Dark Elves stopped resorting to violence. Without squandering this golden opportunity, they changed their allegiance and escaped the tyranny of the Dark Elves. With its economics, politics and military comprehensively suppressed by the other forces, the influence of the Dark Elves was diminishing. Moreover, there were Dark Elves who had embraced the other gods and started following new leaders. The authority of Lorsi was facing an extreme comprehensive challenge. To be faced with such circumstances, would Lorsi not feel miserable? After the peculiar death of her divine descendant illegitimate daughter a while ago, before the new heir could be decided, the Dark Elves' power was heavily suppressed out of a sudden, and now, even her influence and followers were diminishing. All of these were beyond what she could bear. Following the lessening of her vast followers, her divine force was weakened. Out of fury, Lorsi briskly executed the mother of several big families. In the end, the silent hostility between the multiple Dark Elf cities to compete for the Underworld Autarch status grew more intense. Meanwhile, in a series of turbulences, Mother Victoria from the Morseblight city turned out to be amongst the 3 Autarch candidates. Aside from that, due to some historical connections, should Lorsi eventually opt for coexistence with the other Autarchies, Mother Victoria would become the best candidate as the High Priestess of Lorsi. And now, this reason makes her a new superstar in the Dark Elf tribe. In this situation, my letter has to be delivered to Annie through Elisa. Then Annie will deliver it to Victoria by the special communication method. In this way, the letter would not be taken lightly, despite the absence of my signature and stamp. Lorsi the Spider Queen was notorious for her slyness and greed. Persuading her to join other camps wouldn't be a simple task. In this sacred war, If the gods of order are victorious in the end, all existing gods of elves will fall. Hence, in preparation for the future, the elf divine system desperately needs one skillful and experienced god of elves to lead the crowd. You are undoubtedly the best candidate. Please think twice. If you insist on remaining with chaos, would you really want to fight alongside those people who once banished you? Do you think you can rise above them single-handed? If they become the leaders, would you be banished again? Not likely. Learning from the past experience, they will definitely eradicate any root of misfortune, and seek an excuse to wipe you out. I offered Lorsight to be the prime god of the elves, as the outcome of remaining with the chaos would never be pleasant, whether they win or lose. That was my speculation. I never told lies, and it was these truths, which were able to touch the heart of the skeptical Lorsai. Besides, I didn't expect you to raise the flag of rebellion. You see, at present, the elven gods still side the Order faction. They expect you to attack them, not to mention the bitter grudge between you. Letting go of any grudge is certainly not your style. The situation now is in such turmoil, without raising a flag or taking a stand, you can always make a second choice. This is free of risk and a better opportunity for vengeance. Should you miss this, even I will feel regretful for you. This is a golden chance that appears once per 1,000 years. Should you miss this, and wait for another 1,000 years? In Dark Elf language, betrayal is a virtue, and one could easily picture the characters of Lorsai. This proposal allowed her to bend with the wind, and also be the prime god of the elves if things succeeded, and so it definitely touched her heart. To add more authority, at the back of the letter, I had added the mark of the divine force of Heir and Lord Woomians. These two marks served as the justification by two gods of order, not to mention one of them was Heir the Mogul. Perhaps in Lorsai's eyes, the authority of this letter was significantly elevated. It had even become the official poaching of the Order camp. Alright, this event was in fact, not known by the gods of order, and to ease things, Heir had left me fully in charge of this matter. Upon receiving the letter, Lorsai gave no response, but this silence had notified me that she was touched. After some hesitation, she appointed Victoria as the highest priest. This had answered me in a different way. As Lorsai was willing to join the game, the subsequent events wouldn't be within my control. Humphrey, everything you do will come back to you sooner or later. The Dark Elves would go even further than the sins committed by elves in Sluir. I don't believe the elven army will continue to fight the humans if they were hauled into a civil war. You should go back, and let the dogs bite the dogs. Nevertheless, there were still a couple of problems in my hand. Being a black sheep to this extent, Vismercoso was indeed an unparalleled genius. Not to mention the internal strife owing to the long term of willful neglect of government affairs, the invasion of the Beastmen's main force on the Maple City, had prevented Antone from suffering irresistible tension. Seeing the financial report of the Royal Financial Advisor and the military report of the army, I realized that Fismer had led Sluir to the verge of bankruptcy. Stop all the new entertainment facilities temporarily, seal the project of the Imperial Garden, release all slaves as the civilians. As for the concubines in the Imperial harem, they are all mine. I would surely like to speak such dream words of every man, but to retain a semblance of my humanity in the eyes of the world. Alright, not to mention the dazzling silver ring on my finger, I could not help but to shake my head. Dismiss all of them, send those of wealthy families back home, appoint those of poor family as the nurses in hospitals, community service workers, tailors, etc., let them all earn their own livings. As for those who can't do anything, appoint them as the dishwashers of restaurants. Alright, give them all a sufficient dismissal fee, but tell them, the Imperial can no longer take care of them. In fact, these financial and government problems were of little trouble, they were but the awful mess left behind by Fismer, who cared nothing but drinking and healing around. The real problem was the feudal lords of the country. In this feudal era in which sorcery and swords intertwined, due to the harsh living environment and the presence of demonic beasts, most civilians would prefer to stay in the safer, big cities, and the inconvenient traffic system had led to communication and transportation problems between city-states. The best example was none other than Emperor Hilhite, as it was common for the imperial authority to extend only across several city-states. Of course, The rights and obligations were always contradictory. It was never a cinch to protect the people from all sorts of threats, natural and unnatural. In my own territory, the authority and voices of the aristocracies could be even higher than that of royalty, as this wasn't something unusual in this era. The royals had always been compromising, but to offend the aristocracies to the extent that a few aristocracies had utterly disregarded him, and didn't have audience with him in court for 10 years. There was no one but Fizmerkoso. And all of these, was not a trivial matter, just for a famed beauty, to think that he could send the guards to kidnap the wife of the aristocratic feudal lord, yet leaving behind evidence all the way. So fortunate of this bastard to not yet have been overthrown by any aristocrats. Actually, if it wasn't for the sudden north invasion of the beastmen, perhaps not even more than 2 years, there would be a lot of feudal lords conspiring against him. From the perspective of this decadent king, he was but devil who escaped from the hell and would be banished back there anytime, and since the wealth of this country would not belong to him forever, would he not seize the time for enjoyment? As for how terrible the consequence would be, he would care less, as those would happen after his death. Why was he even worried? The situation of the current Sluira was not just so. The Imperials were supposed to stand out and gather all the feudal lords to form an alliance army to engage in this full-scale war, but the beastmen had taken away that authority from the humans, as they gave no chance for Fizmer to fulfill his kingship. But even if Fizmer could fulfill his kingship, how many feudal lords would respond to his call of the expedition? The main force of the Imperial was divided into two. The main force at the border was stuck in the border fortress, meaninglessly, while the Royal Guard army and reserve army had suffered a big casualty just to confront the siege on Antone. As for the armies of feudal lords, they were mostly pinned down within their own territories due to beastmen's strategy of a sudden invasion from all sides. Not only did the nonfeasance of the Imperial shatter the loyalty of some loyal retainers, but it also prompted some people to be more cautious. If any feudal lord was willing to assist the Imperial, that was equivalent to him seeking demise. Fizmer had gone too far, and even if I was the temporary king, this throne was still unstable. Even in the times when sovereignty was dispersed across the feudal lords, rebellion was still technocratic. The legitimate kingship was always the last reason the civilians could use for toleration, and if it wasn't Fizmer showing his devilish nature when his life was endangered, if it wasn't because I was a legitimate misdescendant by law, I couldn't have taken over Antone this easily. However, this was still a taboo, which wouldn't satisfy the feudal lords, and this situation was unpleasant for me. Today, taking over the kingship of Sluira with such an excuse, aren't East Mist and Cheryl both misdescendants? They will probably take everything in the end. If the imperial kingship can be deprived of such, what about the rights of us feudal lords? Evidently, if this situation persisted, if I was accused of being an aspirant, I would definitely be categorized as taboo. If so, my blueprint would come to nothing. Blueprint? Indeed, I had a series of proposals on the Northlands, but being a king was absolutely not part of it, as that would bring deadly harm to me and arouse caution of a lot of people against me. The losses surely outnumbered than benefits. A Sluira royal member was needed, even just as a puppet, would be more legitimate than me, to deputize the kingship. But obviously, here came a new problem. Fizmer had been very ruthless in order to climb up to the throne. Amongst the 3 siblings, the crown prince of the old king was allegedly murdered by him, while the younger brother and his entire family had encountered misfortune too. They were caught in a carriage accident. And now, I couldn't even find a candidate for the puppet I needed. A sudden news, however, had lifted the spirit of mine. The old king used to have a love child, a daughter named Glena. 13 years ago, before the enthronement of Fizmer, she couldn't be found during the extermination of his family. She might still be alive. The lamp of life? I suddenly recalled the dagger with 2 pearls. A Sluira royal should possess this arcane. Besides, the lamp of life, which was always dim, has brightened up since 3 months ago. It seems that the princess has returned to the Northlands. If she's back for revenge, most likely she has been concealed her name and identity. The words of Imperial household had lifted my spirits, hence, I immediately made an announcement, and the patrolling knights had been running across the whole city, shouting themselves hoarse, but still, no one stood up. If she is really in this city, She must be taking precautions against me. Forget about that, just look for her first. Any other defining descriptions? The old man pondered with a frown for a long time, then started speaking again. She was still a kid that year. What traits could she have? She is just a quiet ordinary girl. Oh right, she has 2 moles on her chest and 1 more on her left butt. These could be the traits. I covered my face just as I heard these words. I could easily guess what would happen next. Ding ding, congratulations master for unlocking the special mission, a spectacular welfare plot. Mission target, look for Princess Glina. Don't hesitate, she is somewhere within your reach. Mission reward, through her, you are able to take control of this country, serving as part of the restoration of Mist Kingdom. Roland's sword can perform the first stage of evolution for a divine weapon. Mission fail, the evolution reward is permanently forfeited. The spectacular welfare plot will be replaced with another spectacular but blood and slaughter plot. Bang! I abruptly punched on the table. Indeed, what I feared was what it came to think of this reward and punishment. Does that mean we need to take off the clothes and dresses of all girls of 15 to 16 years old, and check their chests and butts? This is too wicked, this is too vulgar, this is too arid. Cough, too immoral. The old man shook his head with a wry smile. Considering that she would be pursued by the puppet king, she would disguise herself, whether it's her age or gender. She had probably made herself as an adorable boy. I gaped at him. Should I give the order to strip all the young girls and boys? I was afraid I would again step into history, with the name of a lewd king which even surpassed that of Fismer. Finally, after half a day of profound thinking, I activated the communication feature on my ring, making a clean breast of the ins and outs of my matter. If you decide to give the order of stripping, I will pretend that I do not know you from now onwards. Lewd Lord, why did you even tell me all of these crap? Is this your new way of sexual harassment, or did you actually plan to frisk me first? I shook my head. No, I'm just asking for your help. Help? How could I help you do these things? Oh, I understood. You mean her? I nodded my head heavily. If possible, I wouldn't look for her too. Indeed, we need the help of expert, but this is beyond my capabilities. Please help me inform that expert. I understood, but suddenly think it's better to ask everyone in the city to strip. If that guy makes his move, perhaps all of you will be hung on the pillar of humiliation in the history. You think likewise too? Sadly, we have no other choice. I made up my mind. Help me contact that man, contact Bei Ifeng. We need the assistance of him, and his comrades. In this situation, only a true gentleman can help us. To be continued. Chapter 172, Reinforcements. Name? Albert Lane. Job? Freelancer Knight, unaffiliated, but I've been hanging out with the Gentleman Alliance recently. Everyone there treats me kindly, and they call me the flower-dicing swordsman of the 3 swordsmen. I was a bit shocked at the rather open and free-spirited black-haired knight in front of me. I had already prepared myself for any kind of wretched expert that the Gentleman Alliance would send me after I contacted them, but what was with this extroverted handsome guy? He had a squarish face that gave off a heroic spirit. His face was also clean and clear with a hook-shaped nose and bushy eyebrows. His black-colored night attire gave him an aura of heroic coolness, while his long hair that reached his shoulders didn't seem feminine at all. I had the mysterious urge to punch in his handsome face. Cough cough. I don't have any personal grievances with him though. Wasn't he simply the classic enemy of all men, a mega handsome guy? Why was he a member of the Gentleman Alliance? Do you know what you're here for? Was there a mistake with the orders? Albert smiled wryly as he shook his head. There was no mistake with your message. The moment your message reached us, all my companions came looking for me first, as they believed I was the most suited for the job. I was even more shocked upon hearing this. Just the maid outside the door who kept peeping in was evidence enough that this mega handsome guy wouldn't lack women. Rather than him needing to chase after women, it was far more likely that women would chase after him. It's a long story, talking about the distant past. Albert lowered his head in a manner that indicated it was humiliating for him to recall it. It's all due to a mistake I made when I was young. Back when I was still a child, I had a younger sister. She was my angel, my everything. Albert's story was a common one in this day and age. Both his parents had died young, so he supported his family by himself, with his only living relative, his younger sister, being both his angel and his mental support. But when she was 3 years old, she was kidnapped by human traffickers. And so, I single-handedly walked the continent in search of her, and I can't remember my childhood memories anymore. The only special mark on her body is that she has a red birthmark on her waist. That's why I practiced a highly refined sword style that especially aims for people's clothing but won't harm their skin, which is why I'm also known as the close-slicing swordsman of the three swordsmen. The complex expression on his face showed how pained he was by all this. I instantly nodded while expressing my sympathy. He was clearly an ordinary person who was misunderstood as a pervert, something I empathized with completely. You've had it rough. Relax, after you're done with my affairs, I'll use my power to help you find your younger sister. Really? Thanks so much then. I really want to hurry up and carry out your mission now. Please give me the specifics, and I'll begin immediately. Albert was so excited that he stood up immediately and bowed to me. I was also joyed, since this was much better than I expected. There was actually someone normal in the Gentleman Alliance. It seemed like that gentleman aura wasn't too difficult to deal with, so I was filled with anticipation at the upcoming magnificent future. She's probably about 14 to 18 years old today, with blonde hair. No, hair color can be changed with dye, so don't let any girls of this age group slip under your radar, and since she might be disguised as a boy, don't let any cute boys pass either. My lord, rest assured, I'm an expert. Not a single female can escape my eyes or my sword. His rapier sliced an arc through midair with the killing intent in his eyes appearing and disappearing instantly. This moment, I discovered that the person in front of me was actually a top-level fighter halfway to a Legends level. I immediately became overjoyed now. Was I actually getting lucky? Not only was he a normal person who had morals and common sense, he was also a top-level fighter. So reliable. Too reliable. Brother, I bought a beast fang sword pommel for you, you'll definitely love it. A lively girl suddenly opened the door and jumped inside. Wait. What did she call him? Brother? Since she obviously wasn't addressing me, she could only be calling out to Albert, but wasn't his younger sister still missing? Right then and there, my smile froze solid. Thanks to my many years of experience in being fooled, I was already beginning to detect what would happen after. Lena? Why are you here? Weren't you supposed to be at the mercenary headquarters? Albert obviously seemed surprised to see the ponytailed girl here. Big brother Bai Feng told me to follow you here, since he said he didn't know what you would get up to if I wasn't around. He's such a good person, he was worried that brother wouldn't be able to finish the mission, so he had many companions come over together to help. Brother, what's this really important mission that even you had to come here for? Okay, why was I fooling myself? I should have guessed long ago that the Gentleman Alliance wouldn't have a single normal person, but he actually managed to fool me by acting all sincere, which meant he was skilled in his own way. Brat, how brave of you. No, my lord, listen to me explain, everything I just said was the truth. I really was searching for my sister all this time, which was why I received my nickname. Suddenly, the black-haired girl interrupted him angrily. Brother, did you slice off some girl's clothes again? There's already so many girls waiting for you at home, yet you're still doing such things. Forget about the reason why you began doing such things, even though you found me 3 years ago already, you're still using the excuse about my story to pick up girls. So how am I supposed to face everyone? I'm the younger sister of the clothes-slicing playboy. That's so humiliating. How am I supposed to get married? Playboy? Many girls waiting at home? Pick up girls? Every term I heard caused my eyebrows to twitch, but as a veteran of the Triple Times F group, I knew what I should do. Young lady, I'm currently having a serious discussion with your brother, so would you mind waiting outside for us? Oh right, please close the door for us as well. That girl nodded energetically as she seemed to understand I was an important personage. Okay, brother, I'll be waiting outside for you. What a nice sister she was, so understanding. Compared to my completely lawless younger brother, as well as all those rebellious kids at home, I was almost about to cry. Thinking about how I've been single for more than 300 years already, while he had a harem when he was only in his 20s, plus the fact that he was still hunting for more girls to add to his harem, It truly made me want to cry. My finger is currently burning up with power. You winner in life that deserves to die, harem collecting man, taste my personality fixing heaven crushing fist. Take this. My lord, listen to me explain. It definitely isn't what you think it is. Explain? Yes, of course I'd listen to him, but only after an enjoyable beating did I finally stop hitting him and allow him to explain. PFFT, your greed knows no bounds, scum. Wah, it's not like that, I don't want to either, truly. It seemed that my condescension touched a weak spot in him, and he actually started crying. Such a manly seeming young fellow began crying like he was still a child. Well, his painful sobs sounded real this time, so I temporarily held back my desire to rub salt into his wounds. I don't want to either, it's just that I got so used to shredding the clothes of women in that age group that I'll keep doing it instinctually. And, all I'm doing is looking at their waists for birthmarks. Why do I have to take responsibility for all of them? Harem? Have you seen harem members with hippopotamus bodies and monkey faces? All those that want me to take responsibility have such appearances. Even the few good-looking girls that wanted to be with me were chased away by them. How luxurious your worries are. Are you bragging to someone who's been eternally single, and a virgin? No, no, my lord, you don't know it all. The moment I leave, they'll be fighting with each other either openly or secretly. It's so chaotic, they'll use any underhanded plots or techniques. Last month, I was poisoned by my food 5 times in a row. I kept finding poisonous needles in my shoes, and glue all the time in my clothes. I can't take it anymore. Women are so scary. I'm already at the point where I begin shivering every time I see a woman. If I think about them, it scares me out of my mind. He actually did begin shivering as he said so, with his teeth chattering as if he had gotten rabies. Judging by his sudden drop in body temperature and pale white face, he was actually telling the truth. You have androphobia? You're a harem character with androphobia? That sounds like a cliché manga setting. Fine then, since Albert was currently at the extent of foaming at his mouth, I finally had some sympathy for the young breath. 2 people come here and help to call for a priest. But the moment I opened the door, some familiar faces came in. Boss, Brother Bai Feng asked us to come over and help out. Those that entered were all familiar faces from the Gentleman Alliance, Bar, Jinya, Cassio, and... Wait, why was Xuidi here as well, just casually coming over here? You're supposed to be the highest level priest. Lily is here. The question I showed in my eyes received the answer I was waiting for. I understood immediately. With the undead's announcement and as a member of the Blood Tribe, of course Lily could become more active in the East Mist communal country. And if Lily, who was so skilled at internal logistics, took over all the work, the stomachs would indeed become rather idle and have the free time to just do things as he pleased. That guy Bai Feng was actually being quite considerate. Where is he? Did he not come? No, he came. Bar nodded, but his smile was rather vulgar as he made a gesture with his hands that any man would understand. He saw a huge lion's head, so he went off first by himself, and asked us to report into you. I instantly understood, but this wasn't exactly a good thing. A huge lion's head? What the hell, that guy's trying to kill himself. Simultaneously, a sky-splitting roar came from outside the window. Unbelievable. There's actually such a twisted soul in this world, and it even dares to set its sights on me. Take my soul-correcting kick. Fine, that person outside the window on the clouds happened to be the vice captain of a certain Gentleman Alliance. From a certain angle, he really was unbeatable, as that lion's head was more than 2,000 years old, and even I wouldn't dare to provoke it. Ah, it's big bro. Apart from Cassio's sounds of panicking, everyone else in the room seemed calm about it all. Relax, the good die young while calamities can live for thousands of years, so it's quite a simple matter for Bai Feng to live for millions of years. Everyone nodded at this remark. I always feel like even if the entire world was destroyed, he'd still be fine. The uniquely low and thick voice belonging to that man who descended from the sky right after only proved the truth of that statement. Ah, I almost died. Don't be embarrassed, let's chat a bit. Dash, my sharp sword can slice through anything. With cool words and a shining trail through the air, the invisible wind emanating from his sword turned into a cold wind that passed by. Clang. As the handsome swordsman stood up straight with a steely face and returned his longsword to its scabbard, that's when the swishing sounds of clothes ripping and falling to the ground finally happened. Ah, there's a pervert. This was the moment when that noble daughter finally discovered that her clothes were completely shredded, while Albert merely scanned her over quickly but only chuckled coldly before continuing onwards by herself. HMPH, I cut something useless again. Right then and there, that girl went into a crying fit at the incomprehensible act that had just occurred, and her guards hadn't even had a chance to take action yet. Another tall figure suddenly appeared beside the girl as he covered her with his cape. We're currently in the midst of pursuing the criminal who intentionally shreds girls' clothes, but we don't know where he's escaped to. From a certain viewpoint, it could be said that Clint, who was wearing heavy armor, indeed seemed rather dignified. And as for him being the one who gets to act like a good individual, it's doubtlessly because he's also a human, so he wouldn't attract too much attention. Progress is too slow. On the platform to the side, I was unsatisfied with our current rate of progress. This morning we've only managed to check 40-ish girls. How long would it take to finish at this rate? This is already pretty quick. Fortunately for us, the Lantern of Life's reaction narrowed down our targets for us. We only need to check those that recently returned to the Northlands in the past 3 or 4 months, otherwise this really would take forever. The Lantern of Life's functions were limited. It discovered a reaction a bit over 3 months ago, which only told us that Princess Gleena returned to the Northlands at that time, but as for her specific location, if it was capable of following even her specific location, how would the royalty ever have any privacy? Its area was so wide. If only it was more exact, Kelly would have discovered me much sooner as well. At the very most it was only evidence whether or not a royalty member was authentic as well as still living. My lord, how about making everyone in this city naked? It's winter right now, people will freeze to death. Besides, how will we possibly deal with the aftermath? I felt helpless about dealing with Albert, who is currently wielding his sword eagerly at a distance from me. Why was this androphobic swordsman so enchanted with close-slicing swordsmanship? It must be hard for him, since he has androphobia. Ha ha ha. Just as I stated that, everyone around me started guffawing as if I had said something wrong. Is his androphobia just an act as well? This brat's acting skills are really that amazing? No. He's not acting about this, but, take a look, the way his expression changes after slicing some girl's clothes. I focused on Albert, who sheathed his sword as he stated he sliced something useless again, but there seemed to be a sliver of joy in his mouth, and his expression was filled with delight, as if he was enjoying the process. He's enjoying this? Yes, he does fear women to the point of death, and any woman touching him will cause him to scream. But precisely because of this, he especially enjoys the screams of women, which is why he's unable to stop himself from acting as the clothes-slicing demon, doubtlessly because this is the greatest joy in his life. Sigh, for such a young man to turn out like this, with his sword techniques, what a pity. That's not quite so, Adam said before, that Albert's typical sword techniques are only ordinary. Only when Albert's in the midst of slicing clothes will he be at the level approaching that of a sword saint. I was momentarily stunned at hearing this. Sword saints are extremely rare, and require both incredible talent and an extended period of time to polish their skills. They definitely have the ability to take on intense challenges. But analyzing things more closely, I found that this didn't seem right. After his unsheathing slice, he'll slice 100 times before returning his sword to scabbard. Normally he'll emit zero killing intent, but when he unsheaths his sword energy is so imposing that it can kill people formlessly. How is this approaching that of a sword saint's level? He's clearly already at a sword saint's level. This guy is actually a sword saint. No, he can only reach that level when his target is a woman that he's slicing the clothes off of, which is why Adam said he's only approaching the level of a sword saint. As expected, there's not a single normal person in the Gentleman Alliance. Are the other 2 members of the 3 swordsmen similar to him? 3 swordsmen? That's what they call themselves. Everyone calls them the 3 vulgar swordsmen. I shook my head while feeling rather helpless, but at this moment, someone spoke up from behind me. I found the princess's milkmaid from her younger days. There's new information. Chapter 173, The Weight of a Sword. Roland's sacred sword, with this regal sword having to bear more and more weight, it is now closer to evolving and becoming a true god equipment. When it awakens, you shall receive your first true god equipment, Kingdom Class Treasures effect. As long as the East Mist communal country exists, this sword shall be indestructible. If the country perishes, this sword shall self-destruct. Feel free to exchange blows with any weapons using this sword, as even Heir's Reaper Scythe will fail to leave even a single scratch on this sword. System reminder, for Master who's in dire straits currently and becoming more and more unseemly every day, this sacred sword is crying out. It's already been crying. I said it many times already, it's a sacred sword, not a barbecue rack. Just try seeing what happens if you take advantage of its indestructibility to bake some sweet potatoes one more time. Also, as for cooking food, you should use a kitchen knife. Don't you know how to value and respect such sacred equipment? No matter what, it's an artifact left behind by your grandfather's generation. The legendary quest regarding the revival of myths that descended upon the Roland sacred sword has been with me for quite a while, but ever since I entered the Northlands, the sacred sword has entered an abnormal hibernation period. Its original extravagant to the point of opulence characteristics had completely disappeared, and the only explanation about it remaining was that mysterious Kingdom Class Treasures effect. According to the system, the sacred sword seemed to currently be storing energy in order to truly transform into a god equipment. Perhaps when I finished the Revival of Mist quest, this sacred sword would truly awaken as a god equipment. Well, as for the system's comments on how I had used the sword as a barbecue rack and to bake sweet potatoes, I was merely making the best use of its newfound trait. Now that it was indestructible, it didn't even require maintenance anymore. Not even dust would adhere to it, for it to be so handy. Of course I would try finding some extra uses for it. Yep, it was quite normal for me to do so. I definitely respected the sword. At the very least, I didn't use it to hang clothes on. Additional system reminder, you did do so, you bastard. The only problem was that any clothes you hung on it were automatically sliced in half by its keen edge. Okay, let us ignore this system that's getting more annoying these days, and return to the main topic. God equipment? I've actually never used God equipment before, and I don't know just how strong they are. It seemed inaccurate, but I was telling the truth. Just like the name, God equipment meant equipment that was godly in power, typical with a god's soul or power within, so they would definitely be rare and precious. I came into contact with some false god equipment before that merely had the title, but it was certain that they still couldn't match up to true god equipment. As for the original form of my sacred sword, it only began its transformation into god equipment after I ascended to godhood and received power from the law gods. It still needed time in order to accumulate the divine power injected by real gods in order to truly transform, but unfortunately, I don't have any more chances to do that currently. And as for that other so-called god equipment, the Scepter of Eternal Night, yep, everyone knows about what that is already. In this aspect, I was quite envious of Harlois. She personally came into contact with god equipment before, and understood just how strong they were. I also asked her in the past just how much of a difference my items were from true god equipment. Below true gods are the semi-gods, and you know the difference between them as well. Beneath god equipment are those with partial god powers known as semi-god equipment, but those random assortments of abilities semi-god equipment possess aren't actually all that different from legendary or epic equipment, apart from the number of abilities. God equipment however is on a completely different scale. Perhaps they might not have as many abilities as semi-god equipment, and some might even have zero attack power, but they'll definitely have various unique abilities that are the overwhelmingly best in their fields, at the top of their class. After I came into contact with the ancient sea god's bottle, I was faintly able to detect the true uniqueness of god equipment. Even if it was an insignificant seeming ability like returning a water source to its original form, even if the god equipment itself was completely tattered, even against a true god's curse, it was still able to use its ability as normal. I'll skip over the obvious ones such as how fire god's equipment would have something to do with flames, or how war god's equipment would have enormous effects in battle. These days, I've been considering just how the Roland Sacred Sword would end up when it finished its evolution. Based off of my understanding of the system, due to the limitations of karma, it never gave me any rewards that materialized out of thin air. Instead, it would give me what I would have received anyways. Its biggest use was to skip over the needlessly detailed or complex parts for me, and use already twisted karma to twist karma even further, rather than creating miracles out of nothing. The system's rewards almost always had a relation to the cause and effect as well as karma of the mission as well. For instance, that one epic quest rewarding me in the end with points based on my influence to history, and when I defeated the Hydra in the epic challenge, I was also rewarded with something from the Hydra itself. That's why I deduced that since this quest was for me to revive the Mist Kingdom, and the reward was the Roland Sacred Sword's evolution to a god equipment, and also taking into consideration that this sacred sword was the representation of the royal seal of the mist, then the final strength of this sacred sword most likely depended on how well I completed the quest to revive the Mist Kingdom. The higher quality the end result, the stronger that the newborn Mist Kingdom was, the stronger that the Roland Sacred Sword would become. And with many events simultaneously developing, I also constantly adjusted my plans. With our combined efforts, a brand new Mist Kingdom was gradually beginning to form. Perhaps it was still currently rather fresh and tender, but it was currently growing through battle. Perhaps it was currently still weak and small, and in the midst of danger, but when it finally matured as the king among wolves in the north, it would definitely shock the world. Just as how I would have definitely regretted it if I only fulfilled the most basic requirement of the epic quest, I had no intention this time of merely stopping at fulfilling the basic requirement this time either. A country's power will always be limited. Perhaps an alliance with the same goal will be more suited for pursuing my long-cherished desire. The East Mist Alliance was the name I secretly wanted to call it. With the East Mist communal country at its heart, plus the Sluweaver Kingdom, the Shaw and Free States, the barbarian tribes, and so on, they would worship the law gods as their religion, and have non-aggression as their basic tenet. They shall come to each other's defenses and fight strong enemies while united, and gradually form into a simultaneously loose yet tight alliance through difficult holy battles. This alliance would perhaps become the foundational block for me to overturn everything. In the past, I believed that I was sufficient by myself to take care of everything, and that friends and companions would only make me soft and show weaknesses. But numerous defeats woke me up to reality. Personal strength was meaningless in front of the waves of history, which was why this time I had trustworthy companions and friends at my side, whose strengths and intelligence were more than enough to make up for what I lacked, and of course, there were also my allies in the heavens. In the past, I believed that battle would wipe out battle, but endless amounts of death and screaming woke me up to cruel reality again. Any battle without benevolence, justice, and limitations would only bring death and destruction. Warriors without beliefs would become nothing more than butchers sooner or later, which was why this time, I decided to use the various complex teachings of the law gods in order to limit our actions. Even if it seemed rather inconvenient due to having to adhere to so many rules, it was actually a path we must take in order to receive even more support down the road, as well as a yoke upon ourselves for us to not fall to limitless insanity. In the past, I believed that a terrifying autocratic government was the sharpest sword available to me, but reality proved that this was nothing more than a shortcut to craziness. Allies that fought for the same purpose would give you unexpected assistance, while subordinates that merely followed your orders would only think about how to replace you and take over your position. That's why I no longer considered making an authoritarian empire. A loose alliance would be sufficient, while the young leaders and kings could lead their own countries by themselves as the vanguard, and fight together under the same banner, with me silently and secretly making the plans behind the scenes, taking hidden actions, and doing the dirty work. Love and justice? Of course not, that wouldn't fool anyone in this generation, but based on consideration and logical deduction, while something to believe in and a mutual goal to strive for seem rather empty, it's actually quite important. The larger the gathered forces, the greater the chances to overturn the twisted fate, which was why I chose to do this. Reality proved that my choice was correct. The Gentleman Alliance, the Underground Powers, the Church of Law, the East Mist Communal Country and all the other powers, While they definitely had many connections with my previous self, but technically speaking, they didn't have formal subordinate connections to me, but not only did they still follow my orders, even if I wasn't present, they would still be able to operate on their own, and support and help each other, creating a cooperative power that wasn't ignorable. In order to deal with the future, I have limitless expectations for our allies and their support, even if they only hope to be carried by us. Even if they want to personally benefit, that's acceptable as well. By now, it was obvious that this epic quest recognized the new Mist Alliance that I created, and the Roland Sacred Sword's hibernation and newfound indestructibility were doubtless evidence that it received enough power from the gradual growth of the newborn Mist Kingdom. But the system suddenly gave me a quest to find a specific person, which would give me the reward of evolving the Roland Sacred Sword even earlier. Perhaps this meant that it was almost time to use this sword, or in other words, there was a difficult obstacle ahead of me that I would be unable to surpass without using the sacred sword. This was definitely terrible news. But the next piece of information I received sunk me into confusion, as I faintly felt like that damned system had gotten me good yet again. Glina.Casso, she vanished several years ago, and she was supposedly last seen near the entrance to the underground cities. She's right by your side. I recalled the system's notification for me, causing me to think of a certain person, who just happened to fulfill the requirement of having returned to the Northlands approximately 3 months ago. Clint, take off your armor immediately. Damn it, you dare to run? Catch him for me. Nobody expected that even if the holy battle was to involve even the gods, that the first god battle and this holy battle would come so quickly and ferociously. Not only that, it was even due to an internal conflict between what should have been the neutral elves. Until the black magical mist enchanted by the Spider Queen dissipated, the sun would no longer be able to act as a threat anymore to the Dark Elves. And under the protection of various guardian gods, the elf forest under this black mist was now a chaotic battlefield, with elves and Dark Elves fighting everywhere. Impossible. How did they possibly pass by the border guards? Wasn't the underground tunnel being guarded? They didn't come through that tunnel, they came through the Imperial Mausoleum. There must be a new tunnel inside there. There was no way that the Elf Kingdom wouldn't be on guard against its mortal enemy. Having every entranceway heavily fortified was already a long-standing habit of all the elf countries. But this time, the Dark Elves' attack was too sudden. The Tassel Elf Kingdom's Imperial Mausoleum's underground tunnels weren't a natural occurrence, they were the secret escape tunnels as a last resort for the royal family, an artificially constructed passageway that could help them escape to the main portion of the underground world. From a certain perspective, Annie and Anya were favored by fortune. Not only did they manage to reach that critical intersection when they were lost, even more luckily for them, they met Suana, who had escaped into the tunnels in order to protect herself, which was how they coincidentally managed to learn about this shortcut reaching to the Tassel Elf Kingdom. When Annie and her army learned about this passageway, they didn't think too much about it, they were merely pleased to learn that there was a shortcut available for them to take. But when her army camped nearby this passageway, the secret naturally spread through certain channels to Roche, causing this completely unexpected ambush. Perhaps it was the elves' fate to meet with such a disaster. If you looked at it from a certain way, if it wasn't for the fact that certain people forced Suana to her death, the Banshee would never have met up with the Underground Lord, nor would Roche ever have learned about this secret passageway, so this ambush wouldn't have happened. Perhaps this was all fated by karma. The guards at the Imperial Mausoleum were novices that had never experienced combat before. The guards were in the midst of yawning and complaining about how it wasn't time for the next shift to take over. They never anticipated that the shadows behind them had begun to twist and form as life-rending green daggers stabbed towards their backs. All the Imperial Mausoleum guards were slaughtered in just a few minutes by the Dark Elves' elite scout forces without even a chance to raise the alarm. When the main Dark Elf forces poured out from the underground tunnel, even they didn't expect just how loose the elves' defenses were in this area, and how easy it was for them to go through this path. Of course, Dark Elves didn't care one whit about the concept known as politeness. After a brief momentary period of shock, They obviously took advantage of the surprising situation and proactiveness to make their ambush as brutal as possible. The Dark Elves used the highly mobile lizard cavalry as their vanguard. Perhaps this high-tier troop type wouldn't have been as useful in a direct confrontation on the battlefield, but the lizard cavalry were outstanding in chaotic battles. While the elves were busy defending against the Dark Elf Knights' poisonous arrows and long spears, the grey lizard's bites and claws were actually even deadlier. In small contained battlefields, lizard cavalry became a nightmare for the elves that lacked close combat capabilities. Even against strong mages, they were able to use extraordinarily strong leaping abilities and flexibility to pass over the mages' cannon fodder summoned creatures and tear the mages to pieces. With these cold-blooded Dark Elf Knights and lizard cavalry's arrival, the elves that weren't prepared suffered enormous losses. Many villages and cities were instantly lost, and the cold-blooded knights that had satisfied their bloodlust hadn't even had time to dedicate their sacrifices to the Spider Queen when the anxious priest Roche wielded her Hydra whip to indicate the next town for them to attack. Due to the ambush, those small scout squads in the backline suffered losses of over 90%. For someone like Tasia to have lived and even counterattacked was something that was less than 1%, which made the other elves even suspect that she turned traitor. Just like the elf army freely roaming around the Sloweaver Kingdom previously, the Dark Elves army entered the Elf Kingdom and opened holes in its defenses everywhere, and the Tassel Kingdom that didn't have most of its soldiers sunk into a huge disadvantage of only being to passively react. If this was an ordinary war, perhaps the Tassel Kingdom wouldn't even survive until its main forces returned, but this was the prelude to the holy battle involving the personal benefits of true gods on both sides. While the order forbidding true gods from directly intervening in lower species wars still had some effect, there were still actions taken that were in the gray areas and barely touching upon the boundaries of that rule. My children, awaken. When nature's low roar of anger emerged together with High Priest Prescott's angry shouting, ancient trees that were thousands or even tens of thousands years old transformed into tall Dendroid warriors. The combat situation began tilting once more. Forest Guardian Claire Layden. Do you really think that attempting to hide behind a semi-god descendant playing at using God's powers, I wouldn't be able to detect the scent of your rotten wood god power? Since you are the ones to break the rules first, then you won't be able to complain about me. Descend, my children. Tear down these rotten branches, and bring me the head of that high priest descended from semi-gods. Just as the elf warriors were getting all excited over the Dendroid warriors joining their side, the Spider Queens screeching threw them into the depths of despair again. Before nature's angry roars even stopped echoing on the battlefield, a large portal leading from the lower dimension suddenly appeared. Dozens of huge black spiders that were more than 10 meters tall crawled out of the portal, and easily tore through the ancient Dendroid's branches with their spider limbs that were thicker than steel pillars. Even the strongest warriors took deep breaths of worry at this scene. And so, while the ordinary elves were fighting amongst themselves, the far more powerful gods began their conflict as well. Chapter 174, Queen Gleena. From the very start, my search had been doomed to failure. This was because I had misconceptions about my target's outer appearance and characteristics. Gleena. Casso, descendant of the Mist, and the future Queen of Sloweaver. She was currently 15 years old, but if you went by her physical appearance, she didn't seem that old at all. She was about 1.4 meters tall, and her short golden hair was combed into a simple bobbed haircut. Her skinny limbs weren't suitable for wielding swords or other weapons at all. From a first impression, it was easy to think that she was still only 10 years old. As for why her real age and perceived age were so different, it was due to that dark yellow demonic pupil under her right eye patch. 13 years ago, when she had almost reached the point of death thanks to her enemy's pursuit, the demonic blood in her awoke. Even though it saved her, she also became no longer completely human from that point on. The most obvious result of this was the fact that her rate of growth ended up slowing down. Unlike Fimmer. Casso, who was unable to resist the bloodline, Gleena, who lived in the underground world, saw many fallen demonic descendants, so naturally she knew that there were no free lunches in this world. Using demonic power usually cost one soul as the price, so before such a tragedy befell her, she resolved herself to seal away her own demonic power. Magical Seal Armor Clint number 1. That was the name of the magical armor mechanism that Clint never took off. While it appeared like a shabby piece of heavy armor on the outside, it was actually an exquisitely created magical mechanism shaped like a piece of armor, and the real Gleena had always been hiding inside this armor while controlling the mechanism. Not only was the armor a weapon, it even had various anti-magic items and chains inside that chained her up quite tightly. Not only was it impossible for her demonic powers to leak outside, even moving her body was extremely difficult. She had used both physical and magical seals on herself in order to completely suppress her own demonic powers. And since she had decided to seal away her powers, Gleena, who was an expert engineer, gave up on her past close combat fighting style, and chose instead to use explosives, gunpowder, and dwarven firearms as her main weapons, causing the rise of the famously terrifying Clint the Explosive Demon. As for her abnormally high sense of caution, not only was it a result of living in an environment of endless battles, even more of it came from her uncle's assassins and spies sent out to find her. Even now she was unable to completely accept that the person she trusted the most was actually someone out to assassinate her, and after she matured, the bother of her demonic power caused her to go into self-imposed exile. This girl used her own method to put up a barrier between her heart and the world, and hid her soft real body within a rotten metal can. She used small openings and sensors in place of her eyes and ears. She used cold steel in place of the warmth of human contact. Perhaps she was still interacting with humans, but her soul was in self-imposed exile. As long as I don't have any feelings for others, I won't be hurt. As long as I don't trust anyone, I won't be betrayed. I've had enough already. I'm not the type to comment on other people's way of life, but this eye patch wearing girl had clearly been through a lot. Even now, looking at the girl who remained expressionless and silent despite being tied up so tightly, I didn't even know how to deal with her. Since you came back here together with me, you must have had your own plans. Don't you plan on saying anything? Even though you knew that we were searching for you, why didn't you come out and tell us? I'm not Gleena. I'm Clint, not Gleena. Her single lie was filled with self-belief as she said so. She truly believed in this. You reject your royal heritage so much? Do you feel that people will treat you differently due to your identity? They're already behaving differently. Turning around, I saw that the gentlemen behind me had their eyes popping out as they were all staring at her. The fact that Clint was actually a girl probably shocked the members of the gentleman alliance she hung out with more than anyone else. Impossible. How could Clint be a little girl? Just yesterday we talked about so many male topics. He said he was one of the staunchest members of the blonde beautiful girls faction. How could he possibly be a flat-chested lolly? Yeah, we even showered together with no problems. By the way, has nobody ever stopped him from wearing armor in the shower? Everyone got used to it. Isn't there a sentence saying that armor is a man's true body? Upon hearing this sentence, the fact that every one of them nodded rendered me speechless. Even though I believed it as well, but it was still embarrassing to say it out loud. Yep, I even saw him wearing some large bear print pajamas on top on his armor. I thought it was rather normal. Yeah, and I even witnessed him drinking alcohol straight out of the barrel. Alright, Gleena was beginning to chuckle proudly at the gentleman's shock. Ahaha, I'm a combat expert, a master of disguise. I've undergone assassin and anti-assassin training, and I'm an expert in male psychology. I even know how to make perverted jokes in 16 different languages. My Clint #1 armor is absolutely perfect. Not only can it imitate how normal people eat and drink, it can even enter showers, absorb water, and wash my body. I can hide inside it for more than 1 year without ever needing to come out. As for what I shouldn't see, do you really think I want to see a bunch of stupid foolish men flashing off their muscles? I always turn off my sensors when faced with such blinding sights. This cold-faced lolly's laughs made me speechless. She was truly so proud of herself at her skills in concealing her identity. Was there indeed a problem with the mist bloodline after all? Just what was with everyone from this family? But there was obviously no time to waste, so I went with the direct approach with her. Gleena. Okay, I know that you don't like that name, so I'll keep calling you Clint. You're also familiar with the current situation. I need your assistance. Your uncle should have been your mortal enemy, and now that he's dead, it sort of counts as me having helped take revenge for you. Now, I'd like to request for your aid in stabilizing the situation, is that alright? No. Why not? At least tell me the reason. That guy has nothing to do with me. If it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't even return. Gleena had no intention of taking revenge in the first place. Having left home at 2 years old, and experiencing countless betrayals and impacts from her demonic blood awakening, the current her didn't have any memories of her homeland anymore, nor did she have any memories about her parents. Perhaps the deepest part related to her homeland and Gleena's memories were those of the shiny edges of assassins' daggers. If a person had nothing but negative memories of her own homeland, it was only natural that she wouldn't desire to return. Perhaps the only person she viewed as a relative was the Lord of Iron City that raised her as his own son. After experiencing so much slaughter in battle and all those betrayals, she had no interest whatsoever in obtaining power. But, even if Gleena was the type that seemed like she had no desires, she still wasn't difficult to deal with for me. Perhaps Gleena was indeed difficult to deal with, but the Clint that I was familiar with was a piece of cake. Cough. I have the newest explosive formulas here that I deceived the All-End Empire into revealing. Are you interested? They're actually quite skilled in alchemy and engineering. It can be said that this formula doesn't follow common sense at all. They actually thought of the method of using high pressure in place of high temperatures. Darn it, this explosive formula's so complex. Are there any experts that can help me research it? Hearing this, her ears and lips seemed to tremble slightly. She was slightly moved at this, but considering all the troubles that would come with promising to help me, she fell silent again. While your Clint armor isn't bad at all, it's still technology from several years ago. Don't you want some engineers to help you upgrade and improve it? Such a tattered piece of armor is so unseemly. Girls' clothes should at the very least be clean if not pretty. Regardless of anything else, Sulphur Mountain City and Iron City are solid allies now, and your adopted father even has a seat at the Alliance's conference. We've treated you kindly, don't you agree? This time, I definitely noticed how moved she was by the expression in her single eye. Every day you only need to appear for half a day, and act your part. You can do whatever you like during the rest of your time. If you promise to work with me, you can also have first dibs on using any new equipment, and you can also have the new alchemy explosive formula that Halavi researched. Does this include the roll-in line of Titan robots and Timelot's new toys? I immediately nodded as I was overjoyed inside. I wasn't afraid of any request she would make. I was worried that she wouldn't have any requests. I was afraid that she wouldn't speak up at all, but since she said something, that meant that she was definitely considering it. Sure, if you're willing, you can become the test pilot at any time. Since you can control such a tiny armor mecha and make it seem like such a real person, I believe that there's few out there who are above your piloting skills. No, there's nobody out there at all who can surpass me, I'm an expert. Her green eye was filled with confidence. Thanks to her countless accumulated experience, Gleena would never believe that anybody out there had more experience piloting mechas than her. It's a deal. When my large hand shook her small hand, there was a sudden notification from my system. Ding! Congratulations to my master for finding the final Mystacendant. The Roland Sacred Sword has now completed the first step in its evolution ahead of time. Please continue working hard for it to become stronger. System reminder, bastard, do you dare to tell Lisa that you always shower together with Clint? I broke out into a cold sweat upon hearing this. As one of the very few normal people, well, people I could talk to, in the Gentleman Alliance, and also considering the professor's juniors, I definitely used to always chat with or make Clint work for me, and seeing how he was trustworthy and strong, I always had him help me wash my back. If word of this got out, it would be quite troublesome for me. Since from a certain standpoint, we're also related by blood, are you willing to become my adopted daughter? Relax, it won't have anything to deal with your father, it's just a name for political purposes. Alright, I lied here. While it was also for political purposes, I had more personal motivations. If it was an adoptive father washing together with his adopted daughter, that wouldn't seem as bad for me. If you give me spending money at fixed periods, okay. Alright, judging by how her left eye was sparkling, she wasn't talking about a small amount, but it was worth it. Deal. In the public square, the young princess put on the golden purple crown, and the new queen of the Sluweer kingdom was thus born. When she received the golden staff that represented royal power, her first proclamation already shocked the world. I, Gleena the First, declare in my name as the Queen of Sluweer Kingdom that the Sluweer Kingdom shall be a solid ally of the East Mist communal country, and rebuild the former Mist Kingdom together. We shall also worship the law gods as our national church, and from now on, the Sluweer Kingdom shall obey the tenet of non-aggression, and never start any wars ourselves. However, the queen that had just taken up her position lifted her golden royal staff and slammed it back down against the ground, with the echoing metallic sound filled with her thunderous anger. Our lands are currently being pillaged by the fires of war, our citizens are being slaughtered. The current situation isn't one that we chose for ourselves. If we don't want our country and our citizens to die off, then we have to battle. Gleena paused here as her fair complexion revealed a sign of discomfort. In over 2,000 years of history, the Mist family had never lowered its head to anyone. But, my uncle Fimmer. Caso did such a vulgar, unsightly action for his own life's safety and for the sake of power. How saddening! But I already investigated the cause for his rotten depravity, which all came from the demon's machinations. The evil gods of chaos and the great demons corrupted his resolute will that used to be so noble, turning a heroic prince on the battlefield into such an evil bastard that would stoop to anything. All the citizens in the public square were murmuring to themselves at this. The news about Fimmer revealing his demonic form had already spread throughout all of Anchuan, and his crimes were all being exposed in broad daylight for everyone to see, which was why I was able to take the reins of power so quickly. Everything was the demon's plots. My Mist family has never ever surrendered to any invaders in the past. There have never been any precedents, nor shall there ever be any precedents. In my name as the Queen of Sluweer, I declare Fimmer's surrender to be ineffective, and we are still currently at war. We are grateful to the neighboring countries' support, but we ourselves are still the main forces that will resist invasion. We must evict the invaders from our own lands. This proclamation seemed quite normal, but it was actually quite important. Due to Fimmer's previous declaration of surrender, it basically turned the invaders into the new masters here, and the supporting armies became the new invaders. If we didn't turn around this twisted relationship, then the political messiness would cause endless new dangers for us. Our Mist family has never enjoyed battle, but we won't shy from battle either. Since they chose to attack us, and perhaps we're still currently as a disadvantage, but just like the past thousands of years, we shall be the final ones to stand victorious. Gleena paused as she lifted her royal staff and spoke a proclamation that had been repeated endlessly throughout the ages. The will of the Mist shall never surrender. The flag of the Mist shall never fall. The citizens below her and the public square all lifted up their fists, with their suppressed passion finally reigniting after a Mist ascendant waved that familiar battle flag in front of them once more. The citizens of Mist shall never be slaves. We have not been defeated yet. Our country has yet to perish. As long as that flag still hasn't fallen, we shall rise again. At this moment, I was merely standing there silently on the platform. When Gleena rose up her golden royal staff, I also lifted the Roland's sacred sword, which was currently shining with a bright silver sheen. Woo-yoo-yoo. With the battle horn sounding for the counterattack, the ancient sacred sword from epic stories transformed into a pillar of light that reached the skies. Under its might, all the clouds in the sky were torn apart as the light revealed what was hidden behind the clouds. A floating castle, and floating platoon were gliding among the clouds, and what stood out the most of all, was a tremendous tornado wind elemental. At this time, the Tornado Lord had finally come through on his promise, and had the members of his tribe begin their attack on his mortal enemy. Knights, our reinforcements have finally arrived, and it's time to take back our land that should rightfully be ours. Open the door, and charge after me. The Queen proceeded right away after jumping onto the Ice Lion King, and right behind her were the knight squads that were already prepared for this beforehand. Countless battle flags were unraveled as threatening cold steely lights emanated from their sharp pikes and spears. Today was the inauguration ceremony for Gleena the First, as well as the formal declaration of battle by Sluweer. It's finally time to take back everything that belongs to us. Chapter 175, Start of Battle. Every holy war would reset the balance of power between the various races. Not only would the power balance be reset among mortals, It almost always included the true gods as well. Nobody was truly immortal. Not only humans, even beings as powerful as the true gods had their own mortal enemies and insurmountable obstacles. They were fated to fall one day as well, although they would take many lives with them when they fell. With the fires of the holy war stoked, order almost completely collapsed, and the suppressed feelings of anger and revenge finally exploded. There were those that hoped to benefit from the war, or those that cursed their enemies and swore revenge. When these divine existences began encouraging their own forces, it was only natural that chaos would reign. The wind elemental god Cambion was one of them. He was currently rather frustrated. Even if the four ancient elemental gods weren't the main gods of chaos, they were the direct subordinates of the chaos goddess and weren't far from being the main gods themselves. Your mission is to cooperate with the Blackwing tribe and create chaos, understand? He was finally released from his seal, and not even mentioning the fact that people were different from how they were. Those insignificant ones that should have been below him were actually above him. This was unacceptable for someone as prideful and arrogant as he was. As the most ambitious of the four ancient elemental gods, he was highly unsatisfied with his current situation. Damn it, that damn Bodwin, even a mere Centaur guardian dares to be so disrespectful. I, Camdion, am the highest existence. How dare these insignificant existences give me orders? Even after being unsealed, the position of the elemental gods was still rather precarious. As the direct subordinates of the chaos goddess, they should have been on the level of the main gods, but that was nowhere close to the truth, as even the guardian of such a weak race didn't respect them. Unlike the other elemental gods that simply became allied to the mortal residents of the land, the powerful Cambion used some tricks and caused the winged tribes that had lost their ability to fly to completely subordinate themselves to him. With the ancient floating airship and floating castle within his possession, Cambion had his own ambitions. When he gradually discovered the lack of respect given to his own position, he began having his own ideas about the situation. Giving someone as divine as me the order to be the leader of some bandits? If I actually do that, I'll make enemies out of every country along our path, and as the war drags on, I'll become nothing more than cannon fodder sooner or later in this holy war. When the hooded stranger came to visit him and gave him an opportunity, his cautious personality made him continue to observe the situation. Roche's message was what finally gave him his determination. I've already received Ayer and Woomian's promises. Perhaps there will be a new system of gods born in the Northlands. That's all I have to say. Do as you see fit. But no matter what, the Northlands elves belong to me, don't you dare touch them. This twisted and confusing short message still managed to help the wind elemental god understand the conflicting feelings in his fellow ancient god that was also experiencing dejection. Even if I fail, at the very most I'll just be sealed and have a nap again, which won't be any worse than currently. But if I succeed, I can have my revenge on that disgustingly big piece of dirt, and also help the winged tribes obtain some territory, which will also help me on the path to becoming a guardian, gathering belief that can help me raise my rank to a true god. Such a great deal. I'll gamble on it. And with the Thunderlord's ferocious anger, the ancient battle between elementals restarted in the modern age. The earth elementals that had been in the midst of constructing the dimensional bridge met with their old opponents once more. The thunder and tornadoes that descended from the sky intended to rip apart the earth. Boom, boom. The first to open fire was actually the wind elemental's subordinate winged tribes. Cannon fire from the black floating airship set fire to everything before it, and the floating castle in the sky became the wind tribe's fortress and center of command. While the castle descended, countless black-winged angels flew out from within and slid down together with an armada of floating ships as they followed their hunting instincts and joyously roared as they attacked. They chucked their thunder-infused spears that transformed into countless bolts of deadly thunder. The wind tribe's first attack didn't have much of a result, as the highly durable Earth Elemental army emerged from within the ground's cracks and fought back with their giant stone hammers. When both sides' elemental warriors exchanged blows, the battlefield sunk into utter chaos. Countless numbers of Earth and Wind Elementals began close combat fighting, with tall rock giants grappling against whirlwind tornado giants, and the gigantic children of earth tossing huge stones at the children of the sky in response to the thunder that kept crashing down even though there were no clouds in the sky. Just as the combat was reaching its apex, a horrendous scream was heard by everything living as they all instinctively looked to the northern sky where a humongous fiery meteor was slowly falling. A god has died. A true god has died. All the living creatures instinctively knew that the death of a true god had occurred. As for the northern elf kingdom, the elf warriors who were still battling with their utmost looked on in shock at the sight before them, as they couldn't believe how the forest guardian Clairladen that they believed in was actually defeated by the evil god Roche. There was nothing but scorched earth remaining now at the places where the battling was the fiercest. Nothing mortal could possibly withstand such a destructive battle. But at this location, people saw gigantic black spiders that would later give them nightmares. These spiders were feeding together with their children, and they were devouring a rainbow-colored half-human and half-deer semi-god. Judging by the remnants of the trees being devoured by them, even the semi-god descendant accompanied the fall of the semi-god. And so, the forest guardian Clairladen became the first true god to fall in this holy war, and Roche used her successful battle achievement to send out a convincing blood invitation to various existences. Cuckoo. One of the strongest appearing spiders absorbed enough energy as it transformed into a dark shadow that covered the skies while laughing abnormally, before finally transforming into a human-shaped figure that turned out to be a male dark elf. Heavens! It absorbed the Dendroid god's divine power and right to be a god. Right in front of the unbelieving elves' eyes, the Dark Elves' new poison god Felix was born, and the Northern Elf Kingdom was about to face their destined nightmare. From a certain standpoint, even though they were both queens of their own countries in the Northlands, Gleena and Rin were complete opposites. Rin was supremely self-aware of her own status as a Mist descendant. She took her job and responsibilities quite seriously, and always worked her hardest. However, she was limited by her natural talent and abilities, and her growth never reached the goal she set for herself, so sometimes she worked herself way too hard and tried too much, which also gave difficulties to the people around her and made them worry. And the fact that Gleena was a master engineer at such a young age already made many things rather clear. This job was no golden combat job. A non-combat oriented job like engineer needed knowledge and wisdom instead, which doubtlessly meant that her talent and ability were both top-notch. Also, judging by Clint's occasional shocking ideas before, Gleena was even talented in combat strategy and plotting, which Rin was a complete loss at. But the current Gleena still gave me an odd feeling. Even though I didn't have too much contact with her every day, she never said anything unless she had to, and when she didn't have to do anything, her personality would naturally curl up into a ball. It always reminded me of hikikomoras that were afraid to see the sunlight. Ah, the sun is so blinding. Ah, there's too many people, it's really annoying. Ah, I'll be defeated if I go to work. Let me go back into hiding, just 10 minutes will be enough. You'll come back out after 10 minutes? Nope, I'll fall asleep within 10 minutes, and lock the door. No matter how you shout for me, I won't be coming outside. Don't even think about making me work. Fine then. After hearing such a sentence in this game world, I began to suspect if she was another transmigrator from my world who happened to be a complete worthless NEET and otaku. Even though she was talented to the point where she could memorize her lines after looking them over just one time, the fact that she put no effort into anything whatsoever still took up a large amount of my time and energy. And currently, right after she finished her performance, it was obvious that she had no motivation or self-awareness whatsoever as a queen, with her old problematic habits acting up again. Hey, I already completed your request, hurry up and let me go back into hiding. Right after the speech and as the battle horn was being blown, Gleena was already requesting to go hide back in her shell. Hey, you're going overboard. All the citizens are still watching you. Even if you're just acting, you're still the person that they trust in and swear loyalty to, so just bear with it a little. The main forces were about to depart, and according to the original plan, Queen Gleena was supposed to visit and surveil the new armies, so how could I possibly allow her to escape at this time? I'm going to drag this deadbeat NEET under the sun to work. I can't do it anymore. I've already been outside for too long, hurry up and allow me to return to Clint number 1 already. She seemed like she was trying to suppress something, and her pale white face was beginning to turn suspiciously red. "Are you really that uncomfortable? Will you die if you're in the sunlight? Are you a member of the blood tribe? Just what are you supposed to be?" Just as I was hesitating, she kneeled down while clutching onto her right eye. There was a dark yellow glow leaking out from her eye patch. I noticed that something was wrong, and tore off her eye patch. That familiar dark yellow glow instantly helped me to understand what was going on, so I immediately put the eye patch back on her. "Call for some priests and doctors." "No, don't call for priests. Go find some alchemists and apothecaries, and might as well call for the guy who doesn't want his soul anymore as well." "Yep, I'm talking about that idiot Beifing. Before long, people would be here to help treat Gleena." Even though there was no final report ready yet, I already had an inkling of what had happened. "Carwins, you bastard, making more trouble for me at such a time." While holding on to Gleena's petite body, I could detect that her demon's blood was boiling, which obviously wasn't a normal situation. There was only one explanation: the demon Prince Carwins was summoning his descendants. However, the struggling girl stopped me from calling for any medical personnel to come treat her. While pulling on my hand, she requested me with a begging look in her eyes. "Just put me in my armor, there's mechanisms inside that can help suppress my demonic blood from acting up." What a mess. Sigh. Well, there weren't any better ideas. There was no way that the public could be allowed to find out that Gleena was a demonic descendant, so while feeling helpless about it, I opened up her Clint armor. Inside its finely crafted interior was a space that was just right for placing a petite child within. Apart from the half-finished instant noodles and cookies inside it, what caught my attention the most were all the anti-magic chains and magic sealing talismans on the driver's seat. Just as I placed Gleena inside, the armor's metallic shell automatically closed. This was followed by various clinks and clings as she was locked up tightly, while the black heavy armor's eyes showed a steady light accompanied by a large amount of steam coming out of the armor's back. Finally, the metallic giant that was over 2 meters tall stood back up again. "You even have a steam exhaust valve, which is such an obvious sign that Clint is actually a mecha. Why didn't anyone ever discover the truth? I witnessed it once before, but I thought it was just brought on by bad digestion." "It's something that most people would be embarrassed to ask about. What about the light for the eyes?" "It's clearly unnatural, they're red light bulbs, right? There's more than one person with scary eyes in our team." Who knew what bloodline he came from? Since Clint always met people directly, it seemed normal that he was a half-blood. Sigh. Not being a blood tribe or a werewolf though caused me to lose so much money. "Oh, you also placed a bet?" "I bet on half-dwarf, and also lost all my money." "Damn it, just who is this GLO01, that actually bet on a blonde-haired lolly and won all our money last night when the gamble concluded?" "My poor money." "GLO01? Isn't that Clint himself?" "Damn it, that guy cheated all of us by betting on himself." "Fine then, let us ignore these unimportant mysterious ramblings." No matter what, the fact that Clint had now revived before us was a good thing. Probably. Clint number 1, revived. "Ah, I'm finally comfortable now, let's have a blast to celebrate." The revived Clint instantly pulled out several dwarven guns and shot an array of bullets into the sky as the Gentleman Alliance members behind us commented. "Ahaha, how could one round of blasts be enough? Go for several thousand." The armor began transforming quickly as a swiveling Gatling gun was assembled. In some regards, a human identity had always been a limiter on Clint's durabilities. Pop pop pop. Together with the joyous sounds that Clint made while shooting everywhere, he began dancing a dance that nobody understood. And after he finished using up his bullets, he began cackling maniacally while using spare parts to assemble a new weapon. So scary, his entire personality has changed. The armor must be the true body after all. Something like a quiet little girl? Just a hallucination. Unlike those guys who were merely enjoying the show, I knew that Gleena was still resisting the summoning of her demonic blood. Thinking about how the inwardly resolute girl was currently tossing and turning in her pilot's seat caused me to have a mysterious pain in my heart. Had she always been tying herself up like that? At the same time as controlling that mecha, she even locked herself up with chains and injected herself with various magic sealing needles. This isn't even at the level of painful anymore, it's basically torture. Not to mention, I knew that this wasn't a good plan for the long term. A crack in her defenses would appear someday no matter how much she denied her own demon blood, as human willpower was limited, while the demon's summoning would never cease. Forcefully blocking it out would cause a problem sooner or later. The only method is probably that one then. Bai Feng, who hurried over here as well, probably to check the situation, exchanged knowing glances with me that we must have arrived at the same conclusion. Is that really the only method left to us? Its success rate is quite low. But with how strong Lena's willpower is, she should be able to endure it. Just as we were concerning ourselves with how to cure her, a familiar and nostalgic abnormally stimulating scent entered our nostrils. Gunpowder? Adopted father, what do you think of my new fireworks? I created this using the new formula you gave me, and I call it the high-pressure goblin mine. The clinging and clanging sounds finally ended as a large high-pressure goblin mine with a lead wire coming from it appeared. Feeling the fearsome amount of energy emanating from underneath that iron shell, I started breaking out into a cold sweat. Hey there, are you planning on killing your own father already? I already said that it didn't need to be for real, don't take it so seriously. I thought that she was going to use it on me, but after witnessing her rubbing Clint's iron face against that explosive's outer shell, I knew that I had been mistaken. Rather than wanting to explode it on me, she was clearly bragging about her new invention. You've barely recovered slightly and you're already so eager to make a new explosive? As expected of the explosive demon Clint. Guru. A small black rolled over and crashed against my feet. I was no longer able to remain calm after I picked it up and saw what it was. This seems like a safety pin. That's right. Without this, it'll explode immediately. Boom. No need for any more details. I could only sigh as I watched Clint spiraling away through the air while also secretly being amazed at how strong the Clint armor's anti-explosive properties were. As expected, this is just like Clint. Just as I finished my statement, everyone was already nodding in agreement. The armor is the true body, and the sound of explosives is only the accompaniment. A true man never turns around to watch his explosion. The legendary man that leaves together with the sound of his explosives is simply that cool and confident. Alright then, a certain idiot's wistful comment received everyone's praise once again, but I was rather astonished. Weren't you occupied with battling that lion's head? You gave up? That's really not like you. Sigh, don't mention that. I truly lost this time. I give up. I admit defeat. There was actually an existence in this world that Bai Feng was unable to conquer? I was no longer the only one shocked now, as everyone was looking at him with surprise written all over their faces. They were all unable to imagine that he would actually give up, since he was always using true love would never be defeated as his trademark phrase. It doesn't matter how strong they are, or the age difference, since true love doesn't have too much to do with outer appearances, but, he actually. Bai Feng with tears in his eyes. This was my first time seeing such a sight. Was a failure in love that depressing for him? He actually turned into a snow girl, and even a humanoid? A humanoid. How are you supposed to have love with humanoids? This is the greatest failure and regret in Bai Feng. Herald's life. I actually fell in love with a humanoid. My love isn't pure anymore. I clutched my head as I deeply regretted wasting my time on this bastard for the umpteenth time. If he could feel sadness at a normal type of failure in love, then he wouldn't be the extraordinary gentleman known as Bai Feng, with a son known as Sad Wind. Well, we should have made him into the experimental test subject for that goblin mine. It's not too late yet. Let's have a cannoneer. We have a brave warrior who's volunteering to go out and scout the enemy's situation. Chapter 176, New Era. With the fires of battle stoked in Anshion again, there was not a single place in the Northlands that was able to remain peaceful and quiet anymore. As the elves hurriedly escaped to their ancestral home as they received the nightmarish news, the beastmen were the ones who blew the horns for a final battle to determine the outcome. Their free-roaming wolf rider soldiers gathered together again, as the beastmen needed all their strength to attack humanity's final castle, the Maple Defense Line. Maple Castle, this originally isolated and quiet town in the north, had transformed itself into the hotspot where the entire continent gathered. By the time news of huge changes in the Slower Kingdom's capital of Anshion arrived through the special communication channels between the churches, The beastmen were already unable to change the target of their prepared attack. They had gambled every option and available resource they had on the Maple defense line. Even without being expert strategists, the beastmen tribe leaders still knew that unless they were able to get rid of this annoying thorn in their sides and completely wipe out any hope of resisting that the humans had, there would only be unending rebellions in the territory that they had already conquered. They summoned their free-roaming wolf riders back together. One of their mighty beast behemoth squads had already perished in battle. Their disorganized mammoth combat squads that trampled all over the lands had already lost more than half their numbers. Their precious aerial knights had been decreasing in number as if they were perishable food. The beastmen sacrificed so much of their own flesh and blood, transforming the defense line into nothing more than a meat grinder. The humans weren't having it easy, either. In front of the strong Beastmen Alliance's armies, every life became nothing more than combat statistic casualties. Thanks to differences in overall strength, each Beastman that managed to pass the defense line required at least 3 human lives to take down. With defenses stretched thin across the entire defense line, the fact that the commander in charge of defending the western castle door still had the ability to help support other areas was something eye-catching. Princess Nitren, this laughable nickname that was originally nothing more than a made-up name for the sake of popularity, started becoming recognized by all as the battle progressed. But, this female leader who was recently increasing in popularity had her own frustrations, and as for the reason? Due to those all-end folks that kept overreacting to everything and pestering her. Your Highness, why do these warriors' equipment look so familiar? It seems so similar with our White Wolf Squad's equipment. No, it's exactly the same. That's a special alloy from our country. From a certain standpoint, the fact that Darsos sent him it, one of his most trusted advisors here to the Northlands, was evidence of how important he viewed this place. But currently, this longtime acquaintance was being a bit of a pest. Oh, that was information we obtained while exchanging technologies. We created it for our warriors according to the model used for your squad. As for the materials, they're actually quite different. It's just that they've been painted with similar colors. You can inspect it more closely if you want. There's actually plenty of differences in the details. You can create actual products right after obtaining the technological information so quickly. That doesn't seem right. And this armor still has the mark of the White Wolves. Oh, that must be a misunderstanding. These are our new Winter Wolf emblems, which are quite different. See, there's 3 additional hairs standing up on this White Wolf's head. Yep, these are our Winter Wolf emblems, which you can also call 3 hair emblems. That's what Brother Roland calls them. Just adding 3 hairs to the old emblem counts as a new emblem? Do you have any shame? Even if there's no copyright or suing in this world, people still have embarrassment, don't they? If you want to plagiarize, at the very least you should give the wolf 3 whiskers on each cheek. Hemet opened and closed his mouth without speaking up about those doubts that flashed through his mind. Ren finally somehow managed to unconvincingly make Hemet accept this, when a new problem arose. What we used on that day. Are you talking about our floating battleship? The newest arrival that stood out the most in the midst of battle was the floating battleship Borealis. Its existence perfectly patched up the few weaknesses that the Western Castle's defending army had. Heavy cannon fire as support, transporting the injured, and the ability to give the finishing blow at the critical moment. The enemy beast behemoth that died was first injured, then surrounded and killed with the Borealis assistance. So just this accomplishment alone ensured that it would become known to everyone. No, we borrowed that ancient floating battleship from our winged tribe allies. You see, it's already a semi-biological existence, completely different from your 100% mechanical battleships. How do you know that our battleships are 100% mechanical? Those words were right on Hemet's lips, but in the end he didn't counter with this question either. He already knew what was up just by seeing the situation. It was ridiculous to believe anything that Ren said, but since there was no evidence for this type of thing, nor did he intend to ruin the relationship between the 2 countries, there was no use in saying it out loud. Ren secretly wiped her cold sweat. Even if she knew that Hemet wouldn't bring everything out to the surface, the action of plagiarizing right in front of the original owner was something that only Roland could pull off, as if it was only natural with such self-assurance. Our all-land empire is deeply interested in this research area, and hope that we can exchange information. Of course, We can pay the additional price necessary. Kajursi wouldn't be able to recover the information for quite a while, and the battleship was currently locked away in the underground base, so the next best thing would be to at least obtain some information and restart Alan's research. No wonder Brother Roland asked me to use these in front of them. Everything happened exactly as he expected. There was probably also only one person that could so openly steal someone else's work and then sell it back to the original owner like this. Of course, since the Eastern Mist communal country already expected this response, Ren was naturally prepared. Of course, please discuss the specific details with Big Sister Elisa. She opened up a merchant's guild in Maple Castle called the Sindler Merchants Guild, and deals a great amount of business in military arms. It felt a stomachache coming upon him at thinking about that sharp-fanged, sharp-tongued woman. He'd already been to the Sindler Merchants Guild before, and knew just how difficult it was to haggle there. He would probably have to pay a painfully large price for the information he wanted. But, it wasn't a bad deal for him, since the All-End Empire was ridiculously wealthy and could afford it. Restarting research on the floating battleship was the most important task at hand, since the Holy War had restarted and there wasn't much time left. It was vitally important to begin training personnel for this technology as well people to operate it. And just as the upper ranks were discussing the exchange of military arms information, there was a new change in the combat situation. The Beastmen began a new wave of attacks, catapulting countless burning boulders at the castle walls that arced downward from the sky like a meteor shower. The burning boulders had such great force that each and every one of them not only damaged the castle walls, they would each kill several humans with their impacts. However, these boulders were only the preludes to each new Beastman attack on Maple Castle. With the support of heavy boulder fire raining down from the skies, the various tribes of Beastmen equipped themselves with heavy shields as they began attacking Maple Castle again. The air cavalry that descended from the skies together with the Beastmen attack proved that this was no mere testing of Maple Castle's defenses. Air cavalry that weren't limited by terrain and siege weapons that could possibly break through a fort's defenses would always be the main actors in a siege battle. With Wyvern Knights, Thunder Rock Knights, and Harpies as their main aerial forces, the quality was quite high, but their numbers had decreased noticeably after so many days of harsh battling. Dragon Knight. That Dragon Knight's here again. The young green dragon named Osmania and his wolf tribe rider Kakaji had become infamous through this battle. Even when facing off against overwhelming odds, he had already defeated more than 100, which was plenty for him to become the aerial ace of the battle. Everything was now utter chaos atop the castle walls. The wyverns were furiously spitting poison from their poison sacs. The thunder rocks were killing off groups at once with chain lightning spells, while the harpies' spears aimed specifically for the archers and commanders. The Beastmen air cavalry strategic targets were quite clear. They were attempting to clear the way for their infantry to climb over the castle walls, while the Dragon Knight acting as the aerial commander was currently roaming at high speeds and destroying the castle's defenses. In the past, the ordinary human defender's only tactic had been to use human walls to block the elite Beastmen air cavalry, and sacrifice many lives in order to force the Beastmen's retreat. But this time, the situation was different. Inform the Silver Cross Squadron that it's time for them to begin. With the Princess Knight's command, the Borealis, Inviesbele suddenly opened up while it was covering the humans with supporting fire, with countless figures jumping out of its belly from midair. What a joke, they're jumping down from that high. They're suicidal. This general's shout doubtlessly said out loud what everyone had been thinking. For any ordinary warriors, that height would be suicidal unless they knew how to fly. And if all several hundred of these warriors had the ability to fly, that would be even more unbelievable. Sometimes, the previous generation's experience was a type of limitation. As eras changed and technology improved, the common sense of battle was bound to be swept aside. These warriors truly did know how to fly. Awaken, Azure Dragon. Azure Dragon Sword Seal. Together with the fierce roars of the four elemental sword casters, each of their magic swords shone brilliantly, and the Azure Dragon Sword Seal that was activated in this emergency situation began rotating around the four elemental sword casters. The Wind Elves were summoned here by the seal, and they in turn summoned whirlwinds to give these warriors the ability to fly and fight in midair. Of course, The Azure Dragon Sword Seal's whirlwinds were limited in power, and they were merely now falling down slowly rather than truly being able to fly, but this was more than enough to prove that they had the ability to fight in midair. Several hundred magic swordsmen? How is this possible? Middle had the ability to cancel out magic, so for warriors wearing heavy armor to actually be able to utilize magic was already far beyond common sense. But, the indisputable fact before everyone's eyes was a testament to this fact. After a short period of shock, the Beastmen air cavalry hurried to this area, since of course they wouldn't allow these obvious enemy reinforcements to land. Odd-numbered warriors, sword seals overload. The warriors hovering in midair weren't defenseless however, so with their commander's order, all the warriors lifted the magic swords in their hands and all the Azure Dragon sword seals were overloaded with magical energy this time as pale white streaks of lightning crawled around their magic swords. Odd-numbered warriors, target, the enemy air cavalry before us, sword seals explode. Prepare, 3, 2, 1. Wield your swords. All the warriors slashed their swords forward in unison, causing hundreds of lightning bolts to erupt from their swords. It had been a clear sky just a moment ago, and now the sky became filled with lightning and thunder. The hundreds of lightning bolts lit up the entire sky, blinding the eyes of everyone who lifted their heads to see the spectacle. Thud. Thud. When the viewers regained their senses of sight again, all they saw were the Beastmen air cavalry falling from the sky like dumplings, with a minimum of 2 air cavalry squads having been eliminated. What type of forbidden spell is this? It's so terrifying because those magic swordsmen didn't have a single sign of magical waves on them. The other country's residents could only watch it unbelievably, but it wasn't difficult to understand for those in the know. At that instant, the countless wind elementals within the Azure Dragon sword seals transformed into thunder that wasn't individually strong, but the thunderbolts attractive and fed off of each other before finally becoming an inescapable electric net. Its actual force wasn't nearly as formidable as what the viewers perceived, thanks to the lack of ability in the spell's users and the thunderbolts draining energy from each other. The spell's attack power was already incredibly low. But for aerial battles, attack power was never the important part. Just having the stun effect from thunder was enough. The air cavalry that had fallen from the sky weren't actually electrocuted to death as the viewers believed. They were merely paralyzed to the point where they couldn't move anymore by repeated electrical shocks, but looking at it from another angle, falling out of the sky from such a height didn't really have much of a difference compared to being electrocuted to death, as the sword casters expected. Apart from the very few incredibly strong individuals that were able to regain control of themselves and fly upwards again, most of the enemy air cavalry didn't even have time to shout in surprise before crashing to the ground and becoming nothing more than crushed meat. The sword casters that just used their sword seals explosions lost the protection of their whirlwinds, but their even-numbered companions that were prepared beforehand caught onto them. These odd-numbered warriors only fell a slight distance before summoning new Azure Dragon sword seals for their next tactical move. Even-numbered warriors, sword seal overload. The commander gave the exact same order on the midair battlefield again, with many of the smarter air cavalry members hurriedly escaping for their lives. Meanwhile, those courageous ones that had decided to rush the magic swordsman in the downtime between spells were destined to crash into a new electrical net. Sword seals explode. No countdown. Pick your targets freely, wield your swords. The blinding electrical net appeared once more in the sky. Apart from all the thud sounds of the Beastmen air cavalry falling against the ground, the sky had now been completely cleared. There were no survivors left by the electrical net created by several hundred magical swords. Now it was the odd-numbered warriors' turn to catch their companions. Pound. Boom. When the armored sword casters finally landed safely on the ground, everyone on the battlefield shouted out joyously in celebration. It had been a short exchange that lasted less than 3 minutes, which was more than enough to completely wipe out the Beastmen's strongest air cavalry troops from the previous generation. This was seemingly no more than a small battle in the overall campaign, but it actually represented that apart from high-level mages and high-tier aerial troops, there was now a third method to deal with air cavalry: organized magical swordsmen. No small human kingdom would be able to raise griffins. Only human kingdoms that were medium level and above could afford to raise an organized platoon of air cavalry, while in the poor Northlands, the Northerners could only use bows in place of the expensive air cavalry. For so many years on the battlefield, the air had always belonged to the enemy, with air cavalry ambushes being the enemy's ace tactic usable in every situation. But the warriors' cheers were clear evidence that the situation had now changed. "Tell those sons of bitches that the northern skies belong to us as well." One man shouted out what every northerner had been thinking. Even the newly minted swordcasters were hardly able to believe that they had just achieved such a shocking victory. This was just the beginning. With organized magical troops appearing on the battlefield for the first time, the entire world's strategies and tactics would become revamped. Having brought out this new type of troop doubtlessly proved that the East Mist communal country was already at the forefront of the current era. And from today onwards, nobody would ever treat the East Mist communal country as an easily bullied small northern country ever again. What? This time, Hemet was unable to say that it belonged to the All-End Empire. Magical ability required talent, and even the very concept of an organized magical swordsman squadron was difficult to imagine based on the theories of magic. The obviously well-practiced tactics and command system were evidently the result of long practice. In Hemet's eyes, this was probably the ace trump card up that person's sleeve out of what he brought back from history. Ren smiled in delight at Hemet's reaction. From her first meeting with him, this emperor's special envoy had always remained high and mighty with his attitude, as if he was facing a subordinate that he could command at will. At this moment, in front of brand new tactics and jobs, in front of this astonishing battle achievement, the haughty All-End people finally began lowering their proud heads. "Would you like it?" Even if Hemet didn't say it out loud, just from his expectation-filled eyes, it could easily be seen that this emperor's trusted envoy had a desire for this information that was raging like a wildfire. This wasn't even at the extent of wanting it anymore, he wanted to swallow it down whole. "It's quite expensive." Even on the battlefield, the Princess Knight's exquisitely beautiful smile attracted countless passionate gazes. Only, nobody could guess that her delighted smile was due to a base desire to take revenge by viciously jacking up the price. "I'll buy, no matter how expensive it is." Hemet was overjoyed at hearing this news. For such an ace weapon, as long as Ren was willing to sell, Hemet was willing to sell even his family treasures for it. There wouldn't be another opportunity like this. He would only regret it if she wasn't willing to sell. However, Ren flashed a rather mysterious smile upon hearing Hemet's response. "As long as you're willing to pay, there's something even better and more expensive, you know." Timelet, it's time for your little toy to appear. Chapter 177, Craze Stones. From the very start, I wasn't worried about the Maple Defense Line's battlefield, as I had made plenty of preparations there. An organized squadron for the 4 elemental swordcasters, the Borealis and its supporting new air battleships, and the various new inventions by our engineers for defending the castle. Imperceptibly, I had already acquired so much strength, and I left them all at Maple Castle. With them there, I believed that it would be quite difficult to break past the Maple defense line. Okay, apart from the above, I also prepared plenty of other things, as the more trump cards one had, the better. The side that was able to keep his trump cards until the final moment would always have a much greater chance of victory. The Maple Castle defense line isn't allowed to fail. That was something I absolutely wouldn't allow. After all, that was the most critical location of this entire battle. If they failed, that meant that order and balance of power itself would collapse in the north, which could only result in the humans retreating towards the south and giving up the Northlands. In that case, even if we won here, it would still be an overall defeat where we could only struggle to survive and wait for the enemy to encircle us and defeat us at their leisure. Of course, if there was some sort of unexpected sudden situation, such as some evil god of chaos risking his own demise to personally descend upon the mortal realm, the current elemental tide wouldn't allow true gods to descend, so any that dared to personally descend basically wouldn't be able to return, which would make it impossible to defend the Maple defense line. If that type of situation occurred, I also gave them instructions to simply board the Borealis and escape as quickly as possible. If a veteran god of chaos personally came out, then it would take another veteran god of order to deal with him. If the chaos side was willing to make such a sacrifice, the true gods of order would surely send out one or two cannon fodders to play the game of dying together in unison. At the current moment, with the combat situation still unclear, the most difficult part was left up to us. The Anshuan Defense Army's elimination of the remaining beastmen squads was rather successful, as we easily recovered the enemy's temporary battle camps outside the castle with our advantage in numbers and the winged tribe's ambushes as protection. But right after that, we met with an obstacle, the Earth Elemental God Imridalorcan. As the most ancient of the four elemental gods, I knew that the Earth Elemental God Imridalorcan would be a ridiculous one, but I never expected how truly ridiculous he was. As the lord of all earth elementals, his body wasn't as large as I expected, nor did he have their strange features. He merely resembled an enormous stone giant, and he even appeared slightly smaller than the wind elemental god. But when he truly began fighting, he proved the old adage about how fighting isn't about how big you are, but how hard your fists are. As the earth elemental god roared, just one light swing of his fist would be able to crush a huge wind elemental. When a thundering wind elemental lord came over to assist, he easily smashed it between his fingers, and when a floating battleship attacked him with its cannons while being covered by support fire from the floating castle, he jumped up and turned the floating castle into nothing but dust with a triple kick. Anything below the power of an elemental lord, he could deal with using a single kick. As for the annoying winged tribes and tiny battleships, just the blast from his roar's sound waves were enough to crush them to pieces. Monk? This bastard's actually a top-level monk. How outrageous. Yep, Imridalorcan was doubtlessly an expert bare-handed combat master monk. There were no rules saying that elementals weren't able to practice martial arts, but rather the opposite, for the earth elemental god whose body was far harder than steel, his physical characteristics only vastly improved the explosiveness of those martial techniques. Just one shoulder press would easily crush many mountains, and if he tried to transmit his force through a mountain to a cow, I don't know how the cow will end up, but the mountain would surely be eradicated. Imridalorcan's steps were steady and agile, and it was quite easy for him to make Cambion dizzy before suddenly ambushing the wind elemental god Cambion with a heavy blow. Compared to the dexterous Imridalorcan, the gigantic Cambion actually seemed like a slow fatty that could only take blows without even a chance to get in any of his own. Cambion was a typical mage-type elemental lord, but the thunder he gathered was unable to lock on to any target, since he wasn't even able to see his enemy Imridalorcan clearly, so how could he possibly hit him? The ancient battle between elementals repeated itself in the modern day, but unfortunately, Cambion learned to his despair that while his own strength had indeed increased greatly, Imridalorcan had already changed his entire battling style, and Cambion was not even able to get a single hit in. This strange style caused the gap between Cambion and Imridalorcan to widen even further. Hurry, we don't have much time left. Just by seeing the situation, I knew that it was impossible for Cambion to win, and even how long he could last was a problem. For such an old fox like Cambion, it was all too normal for him to run away if he couldn't win. There was zero possibility at all of Cambion fighting to his death. After hesitating for a moment, I still decided to send him a message. Hang in there, we're currently closing the earth elemental door. After it's closed, Imridalorcan's power will be reduced greatly, so that you can grab your chance to take your revenge. If you miss this opportunity, you'll never defeat Imridalorcan for the rest of your life. In order for him to not retreat when he hadn't been truly defeated yet, I could only give Cambion a strong motivation, and just as I expected, Cambion, who had begun to cower, worked up his courage again at hearing there was still a chance. At this moment, under the cover of the chaotic battle, our knights were riding in the snow. Now, we had already entered the Earth Elemental's labyrinth, and our target was of course the currently opening dimensional door. Our combat strategy had been clear from the start. The Wind Elementals and Winged Tribes and even the brave warriors, cannon fodder, that were rushing as the vanguard were merely a smokescreen to disguise our true motive. Anshuan's defense army had been through too many long bitter battles, so it was heavily fatigued and injured with severe losses to their elite troops. Having them participate in this high-level battle between elementals would basically be akin to having them suicide, which was why I gave them the task of cleaning up the remaining roaming beastmen squads, While I took the elites and rushed for the Earth Elemental Dimensional Door under cover of the battle between elementals to destroy the most critical strategic target. If the Earth Elemental Dimensional Door was allowed to completely open, no matter what happened next in the combat situation, the side of chaos would most likely have obtained enough strength to win overwhelmingly, and everything else that we did would be nothing more than mending the fence after losing the sheep, with irreversible damage having been done already. Ha! I shouted in a low voice and defeated the enemy in front of me with a single blow. This smaller earth elemental was barely worth mentioning, and didn't even require my sword. But the deeper we went into the earth elemental labyrinth, the more tiny earth elementals that appeared. They were nothing more than token creatures generated by the earth elemental dimensional door, and they didn't even have self-awareness, so spending time on them was pointless. Just how long are we going to have to kill these for? There were so many walls before us, and we kept hitting dead ends. Doubtlessly, the earth elementals had constructed this into an intricate maze during the interval between fighting with nothing else to do. Our target was naturally located in the deepest part of the labyrinth, and all the guardians that we passed on our way was evidence that my inference was correct. Underhanded mortals, my master has long since anticipated your plot. I'm the guardian of the store, the earth elemental Lord Alados, don't. With Adam as the vanguard, everything was easy. This Alados fellow didn't even finish giving his speech before he instantly bit the dust. Alados was the 12th guardian that we met already. This was just like a dungeon exploring game, with the mini-bosses coming at us one at a time. It was a pity that we received no experience from this, though. Since Immortal Lorcan could return here at any moment, time was of the essence. That's why I looked questioningly over towards Margaret. If my memory served me correctly, this great saint was the most skilled in time and space magic, so perhaps she would have some method to help us. Teleporting everyone to the central location of the labyrinth? Impossible. There's not a single mage that can teleport people to an unknown location, and this type of irregular structure is the worst for teleportation. If there's even the smallest miscalculation with the distance, we'd be teleported into the walls. Then could we only continue onwards one level at a time? We still had to listen to those large rocks and stone giants give their boring speeches? This was evidently not a good idea. I'm the Worm King Gasolai, don't even imagine that you can pass the door that I guard. Okay, fine, I actually did want to hear this guy's speech, since a large worm that was over a dozen meters long was quite a rare sight. But the semi-god mage who seemed quite anxious evidently didn't have the patience for that, since right after the self-styled Worm King crawled out of the dirt, he was sliced into 17 pieces. The earth elemental door still hadn't opened fully, so the only earth elementals and other earth attribute creatures that were able to come to this dimension were limited in power, but this definitely wasn't their upper limits. We could take care of these guys easily, but just recalling back to that Megaton Rock who is currently beating up the wind elemental god while playing at triple kicks in midair, I knew that I definitely had zero chance of victory against the earth elemental god. This was a race against time. If the wind elemental god decided to run off on his own, I didn't have the ability to fool such a useful cannon fodder anymore. Gleena. It's Clint. Okay, Clint, it's up to you now. We're the demolition crew. You understand, right? From long ago, when I was stuck in an irritating maze in some video game, I had always imagined that if I met an underground labyrinth in real life, I would definitely use a different method to go through the maze. Goblin engineers have an old saying, explosions are an art form, so allow me to witness your artistry. Come, give me a good explosion. Everyone get back, Clint, explode everything for me. We're not going to take the door, we're taking the window. Yep, I should have done this much earlier. The exit was right before us with only a thin wall in between. Why did I need to circle around all over again instead of using a hammer to crash through the wall? I'm tired of these damned mazes, as well as all those maze designers with nothing better to do. Why do I have to play such a slow pathfinding game with you? If there's no path, just open one up through the wall. If there's no staircase, I'll just go right through the floor. Just watch. Even if this maze has 999 floors, I'll pierce through all of them with this one explosion. Clint's comments just now as he gave me a huge thumbs up and viciously pressed down on his explosives button were indicative that he agreed with my attitude. as expected of my relative. Boom. The rest was simple, as the elemental titan would show us the way. The closer we got to the dimensional door, the thicker the elements became. All we had to do was follow the trail. Boom. Yet another hole appeared in the wall before us. Using such a high-speed tactic to conquer the maze, all we had to do was continuously sweep away the broken stones, then jump down to the next floor. We were rapidly approaching the center of the maze. Judging by Margaret's crystal ball that was aiding our pathfinding, we were close to our target. DSK, let me do it. I promise we can go through 3 or 4 floors at once, it'll be much quicker. The goblin engineer Jinya. Saw how cool Clint was acting, and seemed to get jealous. He wanted to help out as well, but we prevented him from doing so. So you want all of us to be buried alive? At this, Jinya fell speechless. After all, having Clint using explosives in the first place rather than Jinya, who had even more powerful bombs at his disposal, was doubtlessly because Clint was far more adept at precision. Clint wouldn't bury us while opening up the path to the next floor. Clint became more and more practiced with each explosion, causing less unnecessary broken rocks to be exploded with each one, so our progress kept increasing in pace. I've never thought you were so reliable before, good job. Just as I gave Clint a big thumbs up as well, the entire ground began shaking violently. Boom. Boom. Continuous exploding sounds came from all around us as the ceiling began to drop dirt pieces, with one large piece almost hitting my face. I really can't praise you. Oh, it wasn't you? Then who was it? Roland. I'll refrain from asking what these strange hand gestures mean. There's a reaction of godly energy right above us, let's prepare. Margaret's words immediately solved the puzzle for us. For a semi-god mage like her, the elemental god's energy waves were just like bright lights in the darkness that were impossible to ignore. At this moment, Camdian's message suddenly arrived. Flesh allies of mine, my apologies. I hope that we still have a chance to work together again in the future. Should I say that guy was supposed to be nice after all? At the very least, he still passed along a message. But even though Lorcan and Camdian were both ancient elemental gods that had just awakened from being sealed, Camdian wasn't even able to last 20 minutes. How incredibly weak. It's not that I'm weak, Lorcan's just too strong. Okay then, this guy even remembered to add one more sentence to give himself an excuse. Pound. The current booming sounds and trembles coming from above us told us that this was no time to be blaming Camdian, as the earth elemental god Lorcan was probably right above us already. Just recalling that figure who was brutally beating up the wind elemental god from earlier gave me a headache. But we were already in the enemy's home territory, and it was quite possible that Lorcan had abilities like move through the earth or walk through walls, so attempting to escape now would be impossible. Damn it, Adam. Margaret, take everyone with you, your knowledge is needed there. It was great to be working with old partners. Margaret knew that this wasn't the time for words, so she merely waved her staff and cast a few buffs on us as she nodded and took everyone onto the next floor beneath us. Meanwhile, Adam and I drew our swords and prepared for that guy to come find us. Hey, how's your strength these days? Don't be a dead weight here. HMPH, do you see this sword in my hands? The Roland Sacred Sword, forged 14 times. Enhanced to +7, with power that almost matches the 13 godly artifacts. Hey, take a good look at that rusty metal in your hands, it looks like it's only superior quality, with no enhancements. I'm your granddaddy, and the difference between us is like that of a pay-to-win player and a starving refugee player. Who cares if your level is high, can you one-hit KO everything in sight? If you can't take it then come park with me, your granddaddy will instantly defeat you. Adam didn't even know how to respond to this. Every time they met a similar situation, Roland would always enter his crazed state and say all these incomprehensible things. But since Adam also knew long beforehand that they would meet such a strong enemy, of course he would be prepared. So, he silently put away his cheap superior quality sword, and shook out a short sword from his sleeve. Then suddenly infused it with the power of thunder and caused a 1-meter-long lightsword to appear. A rechargeable lightsword? That's at least a legendary weapon, it must be famous in history. This elven-style carving on it, is it Xylar's Banshee's sword? So you were a pay-to-win player as well, why didn't you bring this out earlier? Were you planning on using the trope of I am not left-handed? Adam lightly touched his sword's tip, causing the clear crystal sword to seemingly become far more intimidating after it was infused with the fury of the wind. He felt quite fortunate that he was able to find a weapon which matched his characteristics. I gave the sentiment of the wind sword to Annie, but since I still needed to be on the battlefield, of course I would go find another sword. I don't know this sword's name, but it seems to fit me quite well. However, I borrowed it from the Cloud Tower, which was an unseemly action, so it would be best to not let Margaret see this sword. Not only was it unseemly, in a certain personal mage tower in the Cloud Tower, the original owner was already howling in despair. And far before Adam even left, complaints about him had already filled the Truth Research Society's desk. If it wasn't for his connection to Margaret, Adam would have been blacklisted forever by the mages long ago. Oh, you as well. Actually, I profited quite a lot from Holland last time. That strong human kingdom truly accumulated so much after so many prosperous years, it would have been a waste to not take something from them. Yep, it's just that even though they're so rich, they're really stingy. The last time I placed my sword on someone's neck. Okay then, just as the two of them began focusing on exchanging stories about how they stole from others, the tardy guest of honor finally arrived. Boom. What came first was the violent shaking of the ground, followed by countless sharp stone spears that suddenly pierced through the earth. It's here. The gigantic stone spears pierced through the floors with such force that the entire labyrinth shook from the impact, as that stone giant finally reached where we were. And when the stone pillars from above were retracted, huge eyes filled with killing intent blocked the holes that the pillars made. That's when we discovered that those stone spears had actually been part of his finger. HMPH, you're actually using such a cliché scene from a horror movie? You think your granddaddy is afraid? No matter how strong the boss, aren't they all just to drop equipment for the players? Come, have fun fighting with your granddaddy. At the same time, the silver sacred sword was currently letting off an abnormal silvery glow. With the silvery glow becoming tangible, the god equipment Roland's sacred sword was about to face its first enemy since its birth. Chapter 178, Royal Protection. Elemental life is typically formed by the gathering of basic elements that lack consciousness. While they appear to be the same as other living creatures, there's actually a big difference, as low-level elementals don't have any feelings or consciousness. However, top-level elementals are the same as other living beings, as not only do they have emotions and wisdom, they even have humanoid forms and the ability to reproduce. But due to the differing structures of their bodies, their deaths will simply scatter their basic element. These elementals are typically able to return to the elemental plane and reform themselves, which was why it was so difficult to truly kill them outside of the elemental plane. Still, losing their elemental power that they could use at will also made them unable to use their true strength. It was both a talent and an attempt to mitigate this weakness that the higher level elemental life forms were always skilled at modifying their surrounding environments. Huge whirlpools deep in the ocean, maelstroms high in the sky, magma hells in the midst of volcanoes, and stone labyrinths deep underground were their favorite environments. They had the ability to change these locations into a different artificial world entirely without anyone knowing, so that they could wield a power similar to what they had in the elemental plane. Currently, this underground labyrinth was far above the level of a simple artificially constructed microcosm. Thanks to its successful connection to the Earth elemental plane, this labyrinth was gradually becoming part of the elemental plane itself. Those minor earth elementals that suddenly awakened their own senses of self were the best evidence that this location was gradually turning into the earth elemental's home turf. Never battle with the undead in the death plane, never battle with demons in the hell plane, never battle with elementals in the elemental plane, they'll be 10 times more difficult to deal with. But, I had a different opinion. Home territory? Foolish earth clods. This was never your home territory, right? Roland's sacred sword. With my soft words, the silver sacred sword began glimmering even brighter than before. I could detect that it was currently the same as me, feeling rage at all the scum that had come over to our land without being invited. You unwelcome guests that just do whatever you want, you really believe this to be your dusty, filthy world? Dust to dust, earth to earth, go back to where you came from. The sacred sword's brilliance was at the point where entire the pitch-dark floor was being lit up. With a mighty shout, I viciously stuck the silver longsword into the ground as the Silver King answered my summons and his soul began materializing. The Roland Sacred Sword was a royal sword that's existed for eons. At first, it was the personal sword of the first King of Mist. It's already experienced more history than can be recounted, and in this kingdom that's experienced many disasters and wars, numerous kings throughout the generations have cut down various obstacles as they led their knights to fight for their country's land. Royal Sword, Guardian Sword, Hereditary Sword, were all new names that this sword acquired over the years with the sacrifices of various past kings of Mist and their loyal knights. Despite the fact that it didn't have any traits apart from being sturdy. This sacred sword was gradually bearing more and more responsibilities. As it evolved from a normal weapon into a guardian sacred sword, it accumulated the power of a soul, the ancestral king's understanding of what royalty was. Royalty was the guardian of the people, the country, the home, the family. The Mist clan that would never surrender forged this unbreakable sacred sword of Mist. And now that it's finally accumulated enough power within my hands, it finally began its next stage of transformation. In the past, I wondered about what characteristics it would have after evolving into a god equipment. But truthfully, this didn't require any consideration at all, as its power was only one from the very start: protecting. The royalty are the guardians. We're born here, and never leave this place, and will be buried here. And even if we transform into decayed bones or nothing but a spirit, we will still protect this land. Isn't that right? My inflexible, archaic ancestors. You actually need this old fellow to come out. What a useless and unfilial descendant. The hazy figure materialized in a silver flash. The summoned king returned to the physical world from being a soul while complaining about how useless his descendant was, but answered the call of his bloodline without hesitation while riding a bull as his steed and holding his war spear at the ready for charging into battle. Atwood.Saint.Mist, nicknamed the Eagle of Glesso, lived from AD 234 to AD 298, dying in the prime of his life. Almost his entire life was peaceful. He was viewed as mediocre in his early years, and derided as senile when he passed 50 years of age. He was always smiling and never seemed to anger. But when he was 64, the northern barbarians happened to invade. Atwood fought a bloody battle with them for 17 consecutive days at the Glesso Plains, slaying several hundred enemy leaders. If only I was born 30 years earlier. This old warrior wasn't dead yet, but my hair turned white already, and my body was so weak and tired, even though the enemy leaders were still alive with tens of thousands of enemies invading, and my people being affronted by them. If I can't return home with a coffin filled with enemy heads, I won't be able to reconcile myself with the idea of dying like this. The ancient King Atwood was riding his heavily armored bull, and behind him were several shadowy figures of old soldiers carrying a coffin that had a big death written on it that stood out and drew attention. In that year, this senile king that people looked down upon went to battle exactly in this fashion. He even had a coffin prepared for himself and brought out in front of his relatives that tried to convince him against personally entering battle. In the end, this old eagle that hadn't shown his mettle in more than 10 years filled this coffin with the enemy leaders' heads, winning the glorious title of the Eagle of Glesso. He narrowed his eyes and seemed to be waiting for something when he suddenly lifted his dark black spear and chucked it forcefully. Boom! At that exact moment, the gigantic earth elemental god had reached his head down here, with his round gem eyes filled with vicious killing intent. But before he was able to take any actions, a dark black spear silently flew and embedded itself in his jeweled eye. Boom! This unpredictable attack was completely impossible to defend against. Only after the sharp spear stuck itself in his eye did Lorcan discover that he was under attack. Immediately following after, the spear's sudden explosion turned his gem eye into nothing but broken shards. Only a single attack caused the powerful Lorcan to go blind. Ah! It hurts. Stupid insect that deserves to die. Who dares to harm the mighty Lorcan? Oh my! Hey big guy! This isn't a place for bastards like you to be building a nest. Take another spear from this old fellow. The squinting elderly warrior finally opened his ferocious eyes as his killing intent spilled out everywhere together with his charge. Giant bulls were a rare species to begin with. Its dragon skin, thick armoring, and weight were all astonishing. It was about 4 meters tall, and its charge resembled that of a wingless semi-dragon, with a terrifying momentum. Its horns were already reaching the roof of this floor in the labyrinth, and the ground shook with every step it took. Borrowing his steed's momentum, its elderly rider didn't hesitate to rush Imrudalorcan as his long dragon spear pierced through the earth elemental god's freshly injured eye once more. The dark black dragon horn battle spear pierced deep into Imrudalorcan's head, causing him to panic as he had never experienced such pain before. Ah! The earth elemental god's shouting of agony reverberated through the entire floor we were battling on. This entire area above us began quaking mightily, also causing all living creatures above ground to panic at the anger of the earth. The narrowness of this labyrinth limited his highly agile body, and his ridiculously high defense that he was so proud of wasn't worth a thing in front of this ancient king. He had never experienced such humiliation in thousands of years. The older a creature was, the more it valued its own life. After finding out that this location wasn't the best for him to fight at his full abilities, Imrudalorcan escaped in a manner unbefitting that of an elemental god. Phew, what a ferocious old guy. Adam whistled in amazement. He never expected that this elderly warrior would be so strong, without even giving him a chance to go out and do battle. HMPH, such a glib-tongued junior. The Eagle of Glasso disappeared into a shadow once more after completing his role that the Roland Sacred Sword had summoned him for, returning to his slumber. As for me, I was sweating all over and half kneeling on the ground. Just summoning this ancient king for that one attack had drained much of my energy. Hey, it couldn't be that you're already about to collapse? Just looking at the way that huge rock was glaring at us, he'll definitely be returning. What garbage, I'm afraid that he won't come back. Adam was surprised for a moment, but his intelligence was quite high when it regarded a battle. He quickly realized what I meant. You're saying he's going to go around us, and chase after Margaret? That's what I would do in his place. Is there any point in wasting time with the warriors like us behind the main objective? The obvious thing to do is go straight for the dimensional door, and once that place is secured, all he has to do is trap us here and capture us at his leisure. I think that Rockhead's intelligence is much higher than yours. There was a rare sign of worry that flashed on Adam's face upon hearing my words. Master monks were already reputed to be the perfect counter to mages, so even Margaret would likely find it difficult to deal with this monster's explosive ambush. Earth elementals were thick-skinned and had astonishing endurance to begin with, and any injured wild animal would go berserk. Imrudalorcan was certain to be far more dangerous than earlier. Then what should we do? I can detect his presence, but I don't have Clint's control. If I break through the walls to chase after him, there's a 99% chance that the walls will collapse on us. Oh, by the way, I noticed that you're insulting me by saying I'm worse than a rockhead. DSK, only being perceptive at such a time. Relax, I have a method. Just go in the general direction, Gleena. I leave breaking through the walls up to you. Isn't Gleena together with Margaret? Are you finally going senile in your old age? It's Clint, not Gleena. His insult was only half finished when it was interrupted. There was no mistaking that familiar voice, but when he looked over to see where it was coming from, there was only an immaterial floating silver armor in midair. Even this awkwardness was completely copied. Okay, Gleena. Hurry up and blast through the walls. It's not Gleena, it's Clint. I know you're called Clint, hurry up and begin, Gleena. It's not Gleena. Okay, Gleena. Gleena. Yep, Clint. Damn it, I'm losing track of what I'm saying. So you weren't naturally a ditz, you were naturally black-bellied. Adam standing beside me was already stunned in amazement, but Gleena was already filled with self-satisfaction as she began blasting through the walls. I also gave Adam an explanation as we rushed on our way. God equipment, Roland Sacred Sword, type, two-handed longsword, attack power, 100 to 100, indestructible, usable only by descendants of the mist, unique characteristic, eternal royal protection. The royal ancient spirits have never left this land. While you are in the Northlands, as their successor and descendant, you can summon them to battle for your cause. There are two types of summons. The first is to summon a random king from the past to give a single full-strength attack, and the second is to summon a cloned spirit of someone currently living. Both types of summons are limited to Mist royalty members only. In the past 2,000 years of history, even the gods have come and gone so frequently, and the newly born Mist Kingdom is already an ancient country, With countless epic battle campaigns. There were so many powerful kings in the past, that no matter which one you randomly summoned, none of them would be too weak. The only part is that the 10-minute cooldown and limited usage of 3 times a day is really annoying. I hope that the next step of the Sacred Sword's evolution can upgrade this. As for the second type of summons, if the royalty is abundant and powerful, it should be quite the ability, but there are too few options right now, so it's only an ordinary skill. However, it just happens to be useful right now. The Clint in front of us was basically exactly the same, and his speed in setting up explosives was quick, decisive, and precise. Our overall speed was quite fast. According to Adam's census, we were almost about to pass in front of a Myrtle. We stopped in a spacious cave. This was a wide enough place that it was perfect for battle. I nodded at Gleena, and her clone spirit immediately disappeared and returned to the Sacred Sword. As for me, I also discovered an incredibly cheat method of summoning. I purposefully sounded as mysterious as possible with my raucous laughter. This type of rule-breaking summoning definitely surpassed my expectations for the god equipment's main ability. Take a good look, and don't blink. Fight for me, Twin Stars, Awaken, Roland, Carowinds. Chapter 179, Chaotic Situation. A true god has died. The forest guardian Claire Layden has died. The semi-god Prescott has also died in battle. The guardian god of the Northern Elf Kingdom was the forest god. This true god's death made all the elves feel as if the sky was falling down on them. This is impossible. Gods are indestructible, how could they possibly die? How could the victim be the mighty forest guardian Claire Layden? This was the feeling that all the Northern Elves had right after the news spread to everyone. For the past 1,000 years, the true god of elves had been protecting them, causing them to become distant from the main events of the Northlands. The cruel competition for survival. The warm environment and peace that was the stark opposite of the battlefield caused them to get accustomed to life under the protection of a god. They viewed it as a maxim similar to how the sun rose from the east. Now that the sun was no longer rising, it was only natural that they would panic to the extreme. We're finished, the Northern Elf Kingdoms are all finished. Those that lost all sense of reason and spread rumors out of fear were directly suppressed by the elf warriors. But fear and unrest were already spreading throughout the entire elf population in the north. While rumors could be denied, some things were indisputable. Due to the forest guardian god's death, the utopia-like elf kingdom was now re-entering reality after no longer having its god's protection. After returning to the circle of life, nature started showing off its cruelty that treated everyone equally. Currently, the streams in the forest were beginning to freeze over, and large amounts of trees began wilting. The forests that didn't belong in the Northlands were heading for death, and the outermost protective forest transformed in just a few minutes in a process that would normally take decades, losing all their leaves almost instantly. The anti-decaying protection from the true god had expired, leaving nothing but wilting death for the trees. Without the forest guardian's forest barrier to protect them, the Elf Kingdom's average temperature was now a stark contrast with the Northland's average temperature, causing nature's natural balancing to forcefully recoil against it. According to the elves' poetic description of what happened, the explosive northern words transformed itself into a brutal seasonal god, and crushed the isolated elven paradise into a place resembling the rest of the cruel Northlands with just a single turn of its body. When frigid winds injected themselves into the elven lands that used to be spring in all 4 seasons, the shivering elves finally learned that it was finally winter. The brutal winter especially made for the elves by the ferocious forces of nature was particularly unpleasant. Just as the elves were sinking deeper into panic, their relatives were in the midst of a mysterious frenzy. Becoming fiercer after each battle wasn't an adequate description of their fervor anymore. In the midst of their major blood festival, the newly born Dark Elf poison god had added a green poisonous snake emblem next to the spider goddess's spider emblem. The Dark Elf gods were no longer Lorsai all by herself, and the ambitious Lorsai was already considering the ranking of newly born Dark Elf gods in the future. The Dark Elf armies were gathering under the flag of the Black Eight-Clawed Spider. The elven armies defending their homeland had lost most of their main forces and were no match for the Dark Elves at all. All the elves could do was watch as the invaders constructed endless bases and siege weapons in the elven territory. The Dark Elves weren't even trying to conceal the fact that they intended to be here for a long time. The Tassel Kingdom's muscle mausoleum had been completely dug up, with all the passages leading to the underground kingdoms completely opened. Every day, countless eager Dark Elves would arrive from the underground world, as if they were bloodthirsty sharks that had detected the delicious scent of fresh blood from their tasty prey. The Dark Elves that had generations of grudges against their elven cousins didn't begin a racial slaughter as quickly as people expected, but their casually apparent preparations for all-out war and that arrogant attitude that treated the elves as lambs for the slaughter caused even the elves that still believed in the possibility of victory to begin despairing. They're waiting for our campaigning armies to return. They have the assurance of definite victory, they have the protection of Lorsai, and our armies have zero chance of victory without another elf god's protection. Just what is the venerable Anslo thinking? Why did he allow the forest guardian to be killed off by the vicious and evil spider goddess? Why aren't our prayers being answered? The elf gods had no time to respond to the northern elves' prayers, as the human gods had already detected their betrayal, making things difficult for them to even survive as it was. From a certain viewpoint, it could be said that the elves lacked someone with leadership abilities who could organize them and take charge. Compared to the major human kingdoms that were treating their guardian gods more and more like lucky mascots, the elves relied far too much on their gods and even viewed the gods' protection as the most important factor in battle. No, they're also waiting for their own reinforcements. The Dark Elves are increasing in number every day. Damn it. Just how many of those Dark Elf bitches are there? Just how many Dark Elves were there in total in the dark underground world? Lorsai herself likely didn't know either. She used her own power to help the Dark Elves possess fertility far beyond that of regular elves, but Lorsai was called depraved for this action and exiled to the underground world. Damn Danslow. You're calling me depraved? Fine, I'll show you what depravity is. I shall allow you to witness true evil. It could be said that Lorsai's self-destructive actions caused the entire Dark Elf tribe to fall into true depravity and darkness. Killing each other, betrayals, and scams became the entire lifestyle of this whole tribe, and even the underground demons wouldn't dare say that they were better at scamming others in comparison with the Dark Elves. But at the very least, it was indisputable that these fallen Dark Elves were incredibly strong. After they broke free from the curse of low fertility, their true potential was far stronger than what everyone expected. There was no race in existence that was evil from birth, as each individual's sense of good or evil was determined by his or her own experiences. Lorsai's tainted dark waters didn't stain the entire tribe. The Grey Elves protected by the Moon God and the Dark Elf Rangers that lived in isolation publicly disobeyed the underground lords summoned by Lorsai. Even the Dark Elves had countless different beliefs and ways of thinking within themselves. Lorsai had long lost control over the entire Dark Elf tribe. But take a look at the current Dark Elf battle camps. The largest continuous campground indeed belonged to Lorsai's flag. Symbols of the moonlight, the blood sword, the icy twin swords, and various others were scattered among as well, with all these numerous scattered camps representing the countless number of traitors to Dark Elf society. Adding them all together, they far outnumbered Lorsai's forces, which was one type of evidence that this tribe contained a huge number of inner factions. However, all of these Dark Elves that resented and killed each other while underground had gathered here for the sake of a unified purpose. There's no justice in this judgment against our ancestors. Even if our ancestors were in the wrong, us descendants have the right to live under the blue sky, under the sun, together with the living. We have the freedom to roam in the comfortable open lands. We will prove that us Dark Elves are the strongest among all elf tribes, that we're the upper class elves that deserve to rule. Under Lorsai's flag, the Dark Elves that had severe differences temporarily banded together. With Lorsai spending great amounts of godly power to summon a magical dark mist, they were able to avoid being burned by the sun. The Dark Elves patiently sharpened their knives in the darkness, waiting for the fated brutal slaughter that was about to occur with their close cousins. Since the Dark Elves had invaded earlier than the others, it was only natural that they began separating out from the other underground forces. Their only target now was to carve out a piece of the blue sky for themselves. This part of the Northlands is enough for now. There's the Elven Spring here, and forests. We can rebuild a kingdom that belongs to us here. There's everything we want. Looking at it another way, as long as the war drums of the Holy War sounded again, The Dark Elves and Lorsai who were grinding their poisonous teeth were certain to return to the surface. Roland and Ayr's invitation letter was what ended up giving Lorsai the best excuse and time to take action. Currently, countless tents had been erected outside the elven cities, and the Dark Elves were anticipating the joy of revenge and bloody victory. The Dark Elves, whose greatest characteristic was betrayal, actually managed to come together for this one goal. As for the Northern Elves that had lived here for so long, this was naturally a nightmare to them. The Elf King Adrian, that just returned to his capital city, stared blankly at the scenery of despair in front of him. Was this what he had sacrificed his own daughter for? Was this the elven strength to rule the ages that the elven gods had promised? I should have expected that the first to stand up in the holy war would definitely become nothing but cannon fodder. At this time, he couldn't help but remember that person's assessment of him and his regret. You care too much about gains and losses, and calculate too much. You're actually only seeing small benefits, but you miss the big picture. Always calculating gains and losses every day, you'll eventually lose yourself in it as well. I'm not wrong. I'm definitely not wrong. But the current combat situation didn't permit for his wallowing in self-regret. The other 3 allied countries' armies had already complained so much to him, and there were plenty that wanted to dissolve the allied armies and take their own troops back to guard their home countries. Foolish. You're even more short-sighted than the useless humans. You think that those dark elf bitches will be satisfied with conquering only the Tassel Kingdom, that they won't go to the other countries? My Tassel Kingdom will hardly satisfy them. They want the entire Northland's elf kingdom. After returning, the devastation wrought upon the Tassel Kingdom had the opposite effect of making the other elf armies want to separate from the allied armies even more. If they continued being unable to come together in unison, the elves were quickly about to lose the war without even fighting. Invite 2 generals and Prince Caslo to a meeting. Just tell them that I have something private to tell them. Have Alvin take the Moonblade elites and get ready for my orders. The king clenched his teeth and made a gesture of slicing his hand across his throat to his shocked trusted retainer. The king had resolved himself to sacrifice everything in order to protect his own kingdom. Nobody could have expected that this winter would involve so many factions at war. The elves' battle, the Maple defense line, and the elemental battle formed the most eye-catching opening acts of this holy war. All 3 battles affected and tangled with each other. At this point, any tilting towards one side or the other for any battle could cause a snowball effect, eventually ending in an avalanche. The Traitors' Battle was the name later given to this war by history, but for those involved in the current era, the future generations' evaluations were unimportant. This frustrating situation where it was difficult to tell enemy from ally was the biggest headache for everyone. There was so much betrayal between the 2 major sides of this conflict, to the point where even fooling your own tribe became a daily occurrence. Enemy today, friend tomorrow. Yesterday an ally, tomorrow a mortal enemy. This type of fluctuation didn't even spare the venerated true gods. When the holy war restarted, those who tried remaining ambiguous were forced to stop sitting on the fence by the respective elder gods of each faction and had to make their choices clearly for which side to stand on. In a way, this was the critical time and point that allowed Ayr's letter, coming from one of the foremost order gods, to have such convincing power to Lorsai for her to reselect the side she stood on. Also, as one of the biggest losers in the previous holy war, the beastmen that didn't have any gods to protect them were aiming to recover all their previous losses in this war. Their earlier ambushes were indeed outstanding, but they had now met with some small problems. Our spies have been completely eliminated. How is this possible? I remember there were 2,376 different groups, with 70% of them being human mixed bloods that are impossible to determine from physical appearance, nor do they even know each other. How is it possible for all of them to be discovered? Some of our deeply embedded spies have been planted within the enemy for 100 or 200 years over several generations, that we never activated. Why were they discovered? As the side with the advantage of being proactive on the attack, the current Beastman chieftain Ammon. Bloodox was currently dealing with a huge headache. From the start of war to now, the lack of a complete information network had always been one of the biggest obstacles for the Beastmen. The most important thing in war was information. Thanks to Slow Weaver Kingdom's policy of peaceful trading, The past 100 plus years of interaction were more than enough for the ambitious beastmen tribes to fill this kingdom with spies like a worm-infested apple. But when the war truly began, not a single one of their planted seeds ended up sprouting. The tortoise tribe beastman making the report was sweating all over. He was the main leader of the information network, as well as a tribe leader himself, but he was currently fearing for his life instead of this group of major beastmen leaders. It couldn't be helped that all the leaders were so angry, as they had raised these soldiers so long to be used when the day came, with war being the most active time period for spies to be used. This was the time for spies to show their stuff, but the tortoise tribe beastmen basically handed in nothing but a blank test paper. There should be 13 groups in Red Maple Castle, but they were all discovered. They're the ones hanging on the eastern castle door. And, you told us that the western castle door's female commander was nothing more than a flower vase, so we concentrated our battle power to attack the western door, and we ended up taking heavy losses. The aerial cavalry that we lost were accumulated over so many years, and you're actually telling us that you didn't know about those magic swordsmen and war machines? You're telling us that you didn't see anything as huge as a floating battleship? You're also useless. Why are we even paying for your upkeep? The raging beastman king lifted up his battle axe while shouting angrily at hearing the information network's mistaken and inaccurate information yet again at this critical juncture. He intended to personally cut off these useless beastmen's heads. Wait a moment. How did our spies get discovered? Setting aside those that were obviously beastmen, as they were just decoys, how did the human spies we bribed and the mixed bloods get exposed? That's illogical, unless. Compared to the raging Eagle King, the Bearman Launch seemed far more composed. But judging from the jade he accidentally crushed in his hands, he wasn't as composed as he appeared on the surface. The loss of a behemoth was something irreplaceable that had already given him many sleepless nights of sorrow. At this moment, when he spoke his final word unless, he looked around him suspiciously at each tribe leader. It was quite obvious what he meant between the lines. For such a deeply hidden information network to be completely discovered, the only possibility was that there was a spy, an incredibly high-level one. No, it's not a spy. Even though the axe was already on top of his head and he was scared witless, the information network leader still needed to say what he should say. It's nothing to do with the spy, it's actually due to a problem with our logistics that caused all our spies to get revealed. What logistical problem could possibly expose all the spies at once? The tribe leaders present all had looks of disbelief. If we look at the root cause, I have to talk about 30 years ago. Since we have simple lifestyles, us beastmen have difficulty making livings in the human world. For the spies that weren't adept at business to be suddenly sent to a foreign country, many spies were cheated out of their money in a short 3 months, and were forced back to the highlands by starvation. Everyone nodded at this. It was public knowledge that beastmen weren't adept at business. Not only these spies that didn't know a single written word, there were quite a few wise witch doctors and shaman that had the experience of losing everything through being cheated by human society. For the beastmen that still had the traditional bartering system in place, the human world was far too complex. Even if they didn't meet a scammer, most beastmen would quickly use up all their traveling funds and helplessly return to their homes. We never knew when the day to counterattack would come. If we kept continuously sending out new spies, this would become a bottomless investment. Our tribe isn't wealthy, so we can't afford it. Finally, a coincidence helped us to obtain a legendary treasure. Treasure? Yep. It came about out of a lucky witch doctor experiment. A witch doctor from my tribe accidentally mixed his cooking spices with his prophecy herbs, which was how he managed to coincidentally create the famous legend, Orion fried demon meat. All the tribe leaders swallowed their saliva in unison upon hearing this. They'd all tasted this red and delicious fried meat before as well. It was indeed savory to the point of tantalizing. Everyone here surely knows about it already. With that as the foundation, we opened up a series of fried meat shops using the Orion brand selling fried meat and hamburgers, causing the Orion name to become famous. HMPH, those damned humans that deserve to die actually stole our formula, and created some MCT hamburger restaurant chain, competing with us everywhere, shameless to the extreme. What does this have to do with our spies being discovered? Ammon was rather shocked at this sudden change of topic. Wasn't this supposed to be about the information network? How did competition between fast food restaurants have anything to do with this? As you know, our spies aren't skilled at business, while the Orion fast food restaurant is one of our only profitable businesses, resulting in. The result was that all the spies opened up Orion fast food restaurants. After one spy was discovered, every single spy was revealed. Okay, fine, since the Orion fast food restaurant was too profitable, there were even beastmen that voluntarily became spies in order to open up restaurants in the humans' fancy world to enjoy their lives. Fuck, isn't that just looking for death? Foolish to such an extent. Who gave such an order? Which idiot did such a moronic thing? I'm going to hang him to death on the flagpole. The beastman King Ammon's angry roar reverberated through the tent, and his sharp voice caused the guards outside to shiver in fear. The information network leader sweated even more profusely at seeing how angry Ammon was. It was you. His reply was in a soft voice, but there were no ordinary people present that could not hear him. The tribe leaders were momentarily stunned at this, then the tent fell eerily silent, with Ammon being the only person to clumsily continue speaking. What? It was you. My Blackrock tribe was originally a subordinate tribe to your Blood Dogs tribe. Since information and scouting had always been the realm of the Eagle tribe that excelled in flying, and you're the master of all Eaglemen, and I've always been your loyal retainer. When you first succeeded your position, you said who knows when those useless spies will finally be useful. It's impossible for it to be my generation, so we might as well take the chance to earn some more money, and let our tribesmen participate in the most profitable business. We're going to fill the entire world with Orion fast food restaurants. We're going to become the fast food kings. Ammon did his best to remember. He seemed to vaguely recall that 30 or 40 years ago, when he first inherited his position, he had indeed said something similar, and even had it recorded in the tribe records as a wise saying. As the Blood Dogs tribe chieftain, what he was most proud of wasn't his martial arts ability or prowess in combat strategy, but rather his ability to help his tribe get rich. It was precisely because of the flourishment of the Blood Dogs tribe that they were chosen as the representatives to cooperate with the Earth Elemental God. This can't be blamed on you. Humans are just too devious. You see, we just found out that those MCT hamburger restaurants were actually spies sent out by San Antonio. Our captured spies were all reported by those clowns wearing red wigs. That tortoise tribe beastman was all teary-faced as he talked about this painful memory. Those mascots that were singing Blue Blue Road. They even hit us with their ingredients, and tossed those disgusting red wigs at us. They were underhanded to the point of putting rocks in their hamburgers. Our fellow beastmen were so pitiful. Our mascot, the white-bearded old beastman, was completely unable to defeat them with the demon bone staff. The scene was unbearable to witness. White-bearded old beastman, mascot? Isn't this just looking to die? Some tribe leader finally pointed out another obvious flaw. This time, it was a certain Bearman tribe leader's turn to sweat profusely, as he also recalled the foolish decision he made 20 years ago when he inherited his position. The information network leader saw this out of the corner of his eyes, but he figured that if he didn't say anything, he was certain to die. Saying it out loud might still give him a chance at living, so he ground his teeth and continued speaking. A certain person wanted to have a remembrance of his grandfather that passed away, and made this extra request. The white beard would represent wisdom, and the staff represented the willingness to never give up, and the white clothes and white apron represented the progress of shamanic culture. He said that it was necessary to make humans understand the beauty of the rough beastman culture. Okay then. The information network leader kept staring at a certain Bearman while saying all this. His intention was obvious: let's not blame anyone here. Cough. I recommend something else. We can actually fight on even without information. The Bearman tribe leader Lond pretended to remain composed as he spoke. Yep, I agree. We beastmen are number one in the world at combat ability. There's no need for us to imitate the weakling humans and use spies or whatever. The beastman King Ammon relaxed slightly as he said so. With the two strongest leaders agreeing with each other, what else could the other tribe leaders say? They could only nod. Notify all beastmen, from today on, MCT hamburgers are our mortal enemies. Orion fast food is our pride. From today on, you're no longer our information network leader, We shall give you the new job of fried meat business consultant, and manage the economy of fried meat for all beastmen." The information network leader was overjoyed beyond his wildest dreams at hearing this. "Wonderful, this is my dream job. I am the chairman of the board for the Orion Fried Meat Association, as well as an executive ranked chef. This will be no problem for me. It's so much better than this annoying information network job. You're the best at picking the right person for the job." Apart from Chief Ammon, who was smiling delightedly from being sucked up to, all the other tribal leaders had strange looks on their faces. "Something seems wrong here from the very start. This job was given to the wrong person to begin with. You're making a chef into the spy master, so of course there would be problems. We're currently at war. Is there any necessity to make some chain fast food restaurants? Didn't you make a mistake from the very beginning? Forget about using a spy as a chef. Don't use chefs anymore as spies." Chapter 180, Cooperative Battle. In the current generation, there were only 4 descendants of the Mist: Carwins, Gleena, Ren, and myself. What I originally expected was that I would be able to summon only Gleena and Ren. However, when I decided to try my luck, I got an incredible result. In a way, the summoned spirits of the Roland Sacred Sword could be said to be the exact copies of the person from when they were living, but Carwins and I were obviously special cases. You could say that we technically weren't descendants of the Mist anymore. At the very least, I've reincarnated several times, and Carwins wasn't even a human. But the Roland Sacred Sword still managed to summon them, and the sight of those nostalgic figures caused me to catch my breath. The blonde-haired, young Holy Knight bowed to me with a brilliant smile on his face, but I knew that deep inside he was secretly plotting in his heart. Carwins had an expression filled with displeasure and his eyebrows were furrowed as if he was thinking about something important, but he most likely wasn't thinking about anything more important than what to eat for lunch. Even though the two of them appeared identical, they radiated completely different auras. It was quite obvious that the summoning of these twins must have been some type of bug caused by our special circumstances. Even though I had died in battle at 14 years old that year, I'm still alive and kicking, which was why this sacred sword summoned the legendary Holy Knight Roland from the generation who had entered Armageddon together with Definder. As for Carwins, this land recorded his final moment when he had discarded his Mist bloodline and turned into a demon. The current Carwins in front of me was the youth from before he had abandoned his humanity. "Roland, don't be a burden for me. Just go ahead and hide behind my back and shiver." The arrogant and strong younger brother had sharp words as usual, but this was his way of caring for his older brother who wasn't similarly skilled at fighting. "Brat, I'm your older brother, so remember to be polite. Otherwise, the next time we have a group date, I'll tell that bear-like girl from the Dino family that you like her. You know how persistent she can be." The brilliantly smiling Holy Knight used a malicious threat, and as expected, his younger brother revealed a shred of fear underneath his icy gaze. That was Carwins's typical expression of surrender. I felt like I was having a nostalgic dream as I watched the twins in front of me. After passing through the long river of time, the twins have met once more. Their conversation made me feel as if I returned to those final days more than 300 years ago, a difficult yet joyous period of both fortune and bitterness. "Oh my, this guy seems quite difficult to deal with." "Carwins, it's all up to you." "HMPH, I knew you would say that. You always run away the moment you face a direct battle. I have no idea how you became a sword saint." Back in the day, we also bantered in a similar manner as we confidently walked off to our own battles. It was regretful, however, that even though we always knew of each other's existence and trusted that the other could change everything, we never met again until the final moment. At this moment, though, the Northland skies were just as blue as always, while the frigid, bitter winds pierced the bones. However, some things would never return to how they were. At the very least, it was impossible for the twins to have such a peaceful meeting for their next reunion. "The next time we meet, we'll probably draw our swords upon each other." "Roland, what are you daydreaming about?" "It's coming." Adam's angry roar snapped me back to my senses. How foolish was I now? Becoming nostalgic on the battlefield was one of the best ways to a quick death. Without any hesitation, Imrudil Lorcan had begun to attack us with a furious barrage of rocks, while my 2 summoned spirits had already begun blocking the attack. Clang! Adam's sword of light was knocked away and he kept spinning around from the impact, while the twins blocked off Immortal Lorcan. Roland from that year had barely managed to reach the realm of legends right before dying, while the Carwins from before who had abandoned everything had also become a legend in human society. This was, perhaps, an astonishing achievement, as their accomplishments for their ages meant that they were super geniuses. However, for the earth elemental god who had experienced countless eons and even participated in ancient battles where the gods were no better than lapdogs, ordinary legend rank strength was nothing more than slightly stronger cannon fodder. Yet some people were destined to be extraordinary. Roland and Carwins were never ordinary legends to begin with. Sacred Sword Blessing, Angel's Descent. Holy Knight Roland casually tossed out several divine art support spells and pushed his younger brother to the front, while he unhesitatingly hid far behind the scene of the battle. It was obvious that he was refusing to engage in close combat. Ha ha. This is you from way back then? What a beautiful scene. HMPH, just how old do you think I was back then? For me, who was such a slacker with an unhealthy body, my title as a sword saint was partially nominal. Besides, I'm a commander, which means that hiding in the rear is the right thing to do. Physical fights are work for the barbaric. You're still supposed to be a sword saint, how shameless can you be? However, the following scene managed to shut Adam up. Holy Knight Roland lifted his longsword as a blinding light gathered on its blade. The next moment, a miniature sun that was too bright to look at appeared in midair. Bullet of light. Just as the teenager's youthful voice sounded out, that sun-like ball of light finished its magical compression and crashed into Immortal Lorcan like a falling meteor. When the ball of light exploded, everyone was temporarily blinded, while the pitiful earth elemental god was forced to take several steps backward from the impact. This is Bullet of Light, the most basic spell that every single knight knows. Are you kidding me? Even Light's judgment isn't this ridiculous. Hey, this is talent for you. How could I otherwise have become the Son of Light? My light magic has at least 5 times the power of normal holy knights, and with the soul imprint of light further increasing my power, it's at least 10 times stronger than normal. Then why don't you just use a higher rank magic? Bullet of Light's basic power is too low, and even if you multiply it by 10 times, it's probably quite limited. I didn't know any other spells. Back then, I only knew the most basic divine spells, and Bullet of Light was the only one I could insta-cast. What are you talking about? Weren't you a legend rank holy knight? For someone who slacked off so much on practicing divine magic, how far do you think I could get? Relax, even though I only knew Bullet of Light back then, it'll be enough. As I expected, the battle was now in utter chaos and the blinding light of miniature suns kept materializing in midair and rushing towards Immortal Lorcan. 1, 2, 3. 50. Hey, isn't this too much of an exaggeration? HMPH, now you know about my power. Indeed, but does this have any difference to your later gather magic, compress, and shoot strategy? So, you were already acting as an artillery from way back then. You actually made zero progress in the past 300 years. Nobody will think that you're mute if you don't talk. Fine, this was an eternal pain buried deep within my chest. After so many years, my only progress was probably that I was now throwing ice balls instead of bullets of light. But currently, bullets of light were more useful than ice balls. The original property of holy light was to cleanse, and in that sense, holy light could be said to be the natural enemy of unnational existences. It would deal additional damage to anything that twisted the natural order of things. Even if elemental creatures weren't as countered completely by it compared to the undead or demons, holy light also had the ability to reverse the unnaturalness of those elements that came alive and return them to their natural state. Get the hell out, evil from a different dimension. The furiously roaring holy knight Roland tossed out stronger, fine, even more bullets of light, causing Immortal Lorcan to actually be temporarily suppressed. Immortal Lorcan would surely be able to ignore an ordinary holy knight's bullets of light, but this time, his enemy was incredibly difficult to deal with as the holy light was far too dense, and he now felt as if he was in an entirely different dimension filled with nothing but light. Impossible. This is almost at the level of the light god's purest light. Son of Light, an existence favored by the holy light? Damn it. How could there be a descendant of the gods here? It's not possible for you to be a descendant of the gods. The Earthclaw's angry shouting caused everyone to pause in surprise for a moment, but now wasn't the time to be standing around. The large piece of dirt immediately came rushing at us while withstanding the endless number of light explosions. And then it suddenly went flying sideways. Carwins proudly showed off to Holy Knight Roland after retracting his leg that had just performed a swift kick, only to see little Roland preparing his crystal sunglasses to prevent his own eyes from going blind. Fine, I understand him pretty well, and there was an 80% chance that he pretended not to see it. Did I see that correctly? He kicked away the Earth Elemental God with a single kick? Just how strong is that brat? Adam was the most shocked instead. At the very least, it's more than 30. If you can't understand it in numbers, it's probably 1.5 times your strength, since he's never lost in strength, not even to dragons. I've heard that he managed to defeat a behemoth as well as an Ifrit lord with one punch before. Is he really a human? Why are both of you so ridiculous? It should be like that, at least at that time. Oh right, since the me from that time was playing with such things, be careful. Looks like I'm too late. Take this. Holy Knight Roland shouted fiercely as he lifted his long sword, and holy light that was dense to the point of materialization began gathering upon it. It was as if he was about to launch some sort of ultimate attack. After everyone's attention was drawn to it, flash and eye-blinding brilliance turned everything snow white, and everyone watching it lost their sense of vision. Ah! This actually wasn't Immortal Lorcan shouting, although he probably wasn't feeling too good right now either. The most pitiful scream came from Adam, who was completely blinded since he had been watching the combat situation. He, too, had believed that Holy Knight Roland was about to begin some ultimate attack due to his fierce shout, but he was completely blindsided. Relax, the sunlight fist doesn't last that long, nor was it a direct hit. It'll probably be a maximum of 30 seconds before it wears off. Yep, this was the combat technique that the me from so long ago invented based on the rather blinding quality of holy light. If there were servants present, I would have had them hold up some mirrors, making it even easier to blind all my enemies. Well, when I noticed little Roland preparing his crystal sunglasses, I had already guessed that he was about to use this technique. Ultimate technique. Your dog's eyes shall be blinded. Little Roland finally said the technique's name so casually, but judging by how slowly he said it, he was trying to torture everyone on purpose. Carwin's shouting proved that this definitely wasn't the first time. How many times have I said it? Before you use your ultimate attack, shout the name out first. Is it fun for you to accidentally injure your allies every time? If you're a real man, then shout out your ultimate attack's name, fair and square. Aren't you just dragging everyone else down like this? The furious Carwin suddenly punched out with his accumulated dark demonic energy and brute strength. The rock wall that he had shattered into tiny pieces, and even the space behind the rock wall distorted. After witnessing the fearsome power of Carwin's punch, even the martial arts expert Immortal Lorcan resolved to himself that he definitely wouldn't let this brat's fists touch him. Demonic descendant? Are you two truly brothers? Immortal Lorcan, who recovered first, was wondering in doubt, but he was destined to never receive an answer. Since he exposed his location by asking that question, the raging Carwins found a target to vent upon and gave a vicious sword slice in Immortal Lorcan's direction. Adam, who was also a victim of the flash to the extent where tears were pouring out of his eyes, nodded silently in agreement with Carwin's reaction. In my opinion, since they were both the hot-blooded idiotic type, they would definitely find many common topics to talk about, especially the part where both of them had suffered under a black-bellied older brother repeatedly. Oh, sorry, it wasn't on purpose. It was all to give the enemy a sudden surprise. It wasn't on purpose. It was definitely on purpose. I inwardly thought the truth to myself. Even if that Roland was smiling so humbly and sincerely, and he seemed like he was honestly apologizing from the bottom of his heart about accidentally injuring his allies, I knew that he was probably laughing inside, thinking to himself, wonderful, I pranked those hot-blooded idiots yet again. Sigh, it doesn't seem like now's the time to be watching a show. I shook my head as I took my sword and prepared for battle. Even if it was rather confusing that the twins counted as a single summoning, I had already used the maximum number of summons for today. If we weren't even able to at least make it an even match, this battle would be next to impossible. But, before I personally took the field, There were some things I needed to try. If I were to be successful, our chances of victory would be greatly increased. Wind Elemental God Camdian, stop pretending that you're dead. I know you're right here. Do you really think that simply watching the show will give you an advantage? Foolish. Still trying to play both sides at this time will only turn you into cannon fodder for both sides. My fierce shouting reverberated in the underground passageway, causing everyone to stop in stunned surprise. Immortal Lorcan reacted by breaking out into a fit of laughter. That cowardly worm, do you really believe that moron would still dare to appear before me? He has already escaped with his tail between his legs. That coward doesn't deserve to have status equaling ours. Immortal Lorcan's laughter echoed throughout the hollow labyrinth. His continuously reverberating laughter seemed to both prove the veracity of his words as well as mock the weakness and cowardice of the Wind Elemental God. Even so, I didn't stop my own mocking words. Camdian, as long as we manage to hold this guy here, our people will be able to destroy the Earth Elemental door, and Immortal Lorcan will be greatly weakened. Perhaps you alone won't be his match. But what if we're included? If you miss this chance that only comes once in 1,000 years, no, once in 10,000 years, do you still think you'll ever truly be able to become the top of all elementals? If you still want to be a cowardly tortoise hiding inside its shell, we can just cancel our agreement right now. You know that I have this power. Are you certain that you want to face Sayer's rage by yourself? Are you losing your sanity? As I expected, mortal lives are so weak, in both body and mind. Immortal Lorcan's taunt suddenly paused halfway through because a raspy voice suddenly spoke up from not far away. How did you know I was here? I laughed aloud in delight at hearing that familiar sound. Perhaps wind elementals don't have the attack power of fire elementals, nor do they have the astonishing defense power of earth elementals, but wind elementals are the quickest of them all. Their innate nature to go in every crack makes them the best spies. And as long as they change their form slightly, even becoming completely invisible shouldn't be too difficult. As long as you weren't willing to accept defeat, you'd definitely follow Immortal Lorcan. That's not enough of a reason. What's more, I believe that the wise Wind Elemental God isn't stupid enough to waste this excellent opportunity. Is that enough? A humanoid life form walked out from the shadow of a nearby corner. He didn't appear physically strong, but the glowing thunder runes on his skin, the silver hair that was flowing even in the absence of any wind, and those eyes that seemed to emit lightning all made it impossible for anyone to ignore his presence. Yep, I love having intelligent allies. Then, let us forget about any past small grievances we may have had, and let's work hard together to keep this foolish piece of rock here. Camdian. Oh my, isn't this our esteemed Earth Elemental God? Why are you blind in one eye? Would you like for me, as your junior, to send you on your way? Immortal Lorcan shouted out his old acquaintance's name in surprise. Yep, this person right here was the Wind Elemental God that had tucked his tail and run away. But the current him seemed to be in top condition in both mental and physical states. Judging by how Camdian currently seemed completely uninjured, it was quite obvious that Camdian didn't use his full abilities earlier. It was even possible that it wasn't Camdian himself that was battling earlier. But now wasn't the time to care about that. Of course, some people always focus on the process, but isn't a difficult process for the sake of allowing people to be satisfied with the results? In that case, only a satisfactory result is the most important thing, is it not? I smiled as I joyfully watched the person in front of me transform into the essence of wind itself once more. Cambion unhesitatingly faced straight off against his mortal enemy, giving us the best cannon fodder again. I still pretended to act mysterious and composed on the surface, but I secretly heaved a sigh of relief inside. Ha, how lucky. This guy really was around after all. Yep, I was bluffing from the very start. I didn't have the ability to detect the presence of the Wind Elemental God who would be the best at hiding his presence, nor did I have the ability to perceive if he had truly lost or had only faked losing. However, just a single bluff had brought him out again, so of course I was quite fortunate. What? I bluffed more than once? Well, in order to fool such a sly old fox, one had to pull out all the stops or it would all be for naught. Foolish one, you could have lived a few more years if you escaped. But now, even if you're added to the mix, none of you weaklings are even worth mentioning. The crazed rock unhesitatingly faced off against the wind elemental god's sudden appearance. Under his thick stone plating, Imrudalorcan's single remaining eye was still filled with viciousness, and even though the numbers were overwhelmingly disadvantageous for him, he didn't even hesitate to attack first. Boom! But when the two elemental gods began fighting, the chain explosions coming from beneath us caused Imrudalorcan's expression to change significantly, as he was no longer able to remain composed. Imrudalorcan, today shall be the day of your death.